guys, it's Senti Reads, and as you can see by the video title, today I'll be ranting about A Court of Frost and Starlight, or ACOFAS for short. This is the fourth book in the ACOTAR series, and also the most polarizing, as even genuine fans of the series tend to dislike it, or at least list it as their least favorite of the books. ACOFAS is by far the shortest book in the series at roughly 230 pages. Google is sort of wishy-washy on the page count, and I read this on Kindle, so I don't have an exact number on the page count, but it is very short compared to the others. For context, the last book in the series, ACOWAR, was over 700 pages, and I didn't look up what the other ones are, but I'll put them on the screen now, so you can see the relative page counts. Not only is ACOFAS much shorter than the other books in the series, but it also doesn't really have a plot, and is often referred to as a Christmas special. You'll find out why it's called that pretty quickly once I start my rant. ACOFAS is more or less meant to wrap up Feyre and Rhysand's storyline before the next book, A Court of Silver Flames, pivots to Nesta's perspective. I think that's another key reason why ACOFAS is so disliked, because to say Nesta is a polarizing character would be a major understatement, and fans of Feyre and Rhysand didn't want to see their story end in favor of a character they did not like. And I know that's not true of all ACOTAR fans, because many people do actually like Nesta, and I'm kind of on the fence about Nesta myself, but we'll get into that in A Court of Silver Flames whenever we cover that nonsense. The ACOTAR coloring book ends with ACOWAR, so I'm switching things up in this video by doing a paint by numbers that I thought kind of looked like Feyre. To be clear, it's not actually Feyre or affiliated with ACOTAR in any way, but I thought it would be fun to channel my inner Feyre considering she's a painter. ACOFAS is mostly a cozy, fluffy book, but please check the screen now for a list of content warnings if you have any sensitivities. I will see you in the next video, that is totally fine, but again, it is a mostly cozy book. Also, I want to give a disclaimer that I'm especially moody, sassy, and unhinged in this rant because things have been a little hectic for me since I posted my last video. I wanted to get this video out much sooner, but the timing worked out considering ACOFAS is a Christmas special and it's December now, so Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to anyone who celebrates anything this winter season. Grab yourself a hot chocolate or some other seasonally appropriate treat, and let's jump right into ACOFAS.
Santa. No witnesses?
The book opens with some exposition that it's winter now, and unlike the seasonal courts, the night court experiences weather changes, so it's all snowy and cold now. Side note, I'd hate to live in the winter court. Being stuck in perpetual winter seems really depressing, and I don't really like snow, but I guess they must like it there if they live there, so good for them. In case you've forgotten already, Feyre reminds us that she's the Avatar. Deep inside me, rising with every swirling flake, a sparkling crisp power stirred. I was High Lady of the Night Court, yes, but also one blessed with the gifts of all the courts. It seemed winter now wanted to play. Do Feyre's newly awakened winter powers go anywhere in this book? Of course not. Nothing goes anywhere in this book. And I know that sounds like I'm complaining, but I actually kind of like that this book doesn't even try to pretend that it has a plot like the other books have. As I said in my intro, this book is basically a Christmas special, and I wish the rest of the series was as short and vibey as this one. But I am getting ahead of myself though, because there's plenty I don't like about ACOFAS. There is a lot of bad shit in this book still, so let's press on. Feyre wakes up in bed alone, and we're told that Rhysand has been super busy with the fallout of the war and dealing with their allies and all that. Other than the wall between the human and fairy realm being blasted down, I don't really think the war has really affected things that much, but the narrative tries to pretend that it has and everything's so different now. Truly, I think that the biggest change was overthrowing Amarantha, and then this stuff with Hybern is kind of inconsequential. Like, the Amarantha thing was way more important, and the war, like, it just isn't important to me. Anyway, Feyre goes to the kitchen and washes her own dishes, which I guess we're supposed to applaud her now because she's technically like a queen. Well, not a queen, the High Lady, and she shouldn't have to do her own dishes. She has servants for that, but Feyre is so humble. She still washes her own dishes. Good for her. One servant is in the kitchen making a pie, so she and Feyre talk about the upcoming winter solstice, which is basically fairy Christmas. Throughout this book, I will be using both solstice and Christmas interchangeably, but I think I'll end up saying Christmas more. They're like the same thing. It's the same. Oh, and also as a reminder, that is also Feyre's birthday, but she's hoping that nobody will remember that because she doesn't want anybody to fuss over her because she's just so humble and kind. Feyre thinks about how the festivals slash holidays or whatever in the spring court totally sucked ass, and so she hopes that things will be less stuffy in the night court with like the solstice stuff. And obviously they will be because the night court is just so much better than the spring court and they're all friends and they're family and blah blah blah. Like, I don't know what Feyre is worried about. We then get a tone shift from the cozy winter vibes as Feyre recalls her war trauma from the last book. Working had helped, both of us, keeping busy, keeping focused. I sometimes dreaded the quiet, idle days when all those thoughts snared me at last, when there was nothing but me in my mind, and that memory of Rhys laying dead on the rocky ground, the King of Hybern snapping my father's neck, all those Illyrians blasted out of the sky and falling to earth as ashes.
Things.
Oh, that's terrifying.
Good lord, that got dark fast considering we opened up this book talking about Christmas. I'm not implying that they should all just forget about the war, but whenever they bring it up, it really kills the Christmas vibe. As I said, this is the Christmas special, and most of this book is everyone trying to figure out what presents to buy each other, so getting the random war trauma flashbacks is jarring and sort of off-putting. And I mean that in a way that I don't think was intentional, because PTSD very much is, like, inconvenient in the worst way to describe it possible. And that's all to say that I don't think this is some intentional representation of PTSD that is very jarring and can hit you out of nowhere even in your best moments. Like, I don't think this was intentional. I think SJM just has a tone issue. Because she has had tone issues in all of the rest of her books with all this whiplash. Anyway, Feyre goes upstairs to get dressed and puts on a, quote, heavy charcoal sweater, tight black leggings, and fleece-lined boots, which feels very modern to me. In the first book, everyone is wearing tunics and cloaks and all that shit, and now all of a sudden we have leggings, and that's just very modern to me. Leggings? Really? Okay then. Feyre has another war flashback and nearly has a panic attack, and then derails to explain the layout of the room and what's in it. I'm aware that observing your surroundings is a grounding technique to calm yourself, but it doesn't really feel like that's what Feyre is doing, and it's just a random side tangent instead. We're told that there's a bunch of weapons around the room and they could store them in their weird little pocket dimensions, but they don't for reasons? Like, the pocket dimension thing is weird. They used it a lot in ACOFAS and then, like, never used it again. We then get another topic change as Feyre info dumps about where everyone else is living. Elaine is still living there with them in the townhouse, and Nesta and Lucien have their own apartments in Valaris. Apparently Lucien did visit the spring court after the war, but he must not have been welcome to stay, or he didn't want to, and fuck, I wouldn't want to either. Tamlin sucks. I hadn't asked Lucien any questions about that visit to Tamlin. Lucien hadn't explained the black eye and cut lip either. He'd only asked Rhys and me if we knew of a place to stay in Valaris, since he did not wish to inconvenience us further by staying at the townhouse, and did not wish to be isolated at the House of Wind. He hadn't mentioned Elaine, or his proximity to her. Elaine had not asked him to stay or to go, and whether she cared about the bruises on his face, she certainly hadn't let on. But Lucien had remained, and found ways to keep busy, often gone for days or weeks at a time. Remember when Lucien told Feyre that she was a better friend to him than he ever was to her? Nonsense. Total nonsense. Feyre holds it against Lucien that he saw how Tamlin was mistreating her and, like, even physically harming her, and that he didn't help, and now that the roles are reversed, Feyre isn't speaking up or doing anything for Lucien either. Maybe that's what she thinks he deserves, or she doesn't want to get involved with Tamlin after finally getting away with him, which I do think is kind of fair, but she could at least ask Lucien if he's okay and, like, not get involved with Tamlin. She could at least talk to Lucien. Like, I think both Feyre and Lucien have this unique experience of being close with Tamlin and experiencing all of his good and bad qualities, so they should be talking to each other for support. Feyre is just not a good friend. And yet again, Lucien gets the short end of the stick in this book, and Feyre is weirdly mean to him, but we'll get to that later. Even though Nesta and Lucien aren't living there anymore, Feyre still thinks about how small the townhouse is and how everybody's gonna have to cram in there for Fairy Christmas. Because even though the House of Wind, which is their other house in Valaris, that place is much larger, they don't want to celebrate there because the vibe is wrong. Like, it's viewed as their formal location, I guess? I don't know. This does come back later, but first Feyre has to complain about work. I scowled at the pile of papers I had to sort through. Letters from other courts, priestesses angling for positions, and kingdoms both human and fairy. I'd put them off for weeks now, and had finally set aside this morning to wade through them. High Lady of the Night Court, Defender of the Rainbow, and the desk.
That is so lame.
She put them off for weeks? What has she been doing this whole time then? Rhysand is off forging allies and Feyre can't answer the mail? Seriously? It seems like some of the communication with their allies is through the mail. Like, what is she doing then? I snorted, flicking my braid over a shoulder. Perhaps my solstice gift to myself would be to hire a personal secretary, someone to read and answer those things, to sort out what was vital and what could be put aside. Because a little extra time to myself, for Rhys... I'd looked through the court budget that Rhys never really cared to follow and see what could be moved around for the possibility of such a thing, for him and for me. I knew our coffers ran deep, knew we could easily afford it and not make so much as a dent in our fortune, but I didn't mind the work. I loved the work, actually. This territory, its people, they were as much my heart as my mate. Until yesterday, nearly every waking hour had been packed with helping them, until I'd been politely, graciously told to go home and enjoy the holiday. Bro, what? I am so much more confused now, because didn't it kind of seem like Feyre was complaining about the work and now all of a sudden she loves it? I mean, I guess she doesn't love the paperwork, but she loves serving people? Why is she not hiring a secretary? If she really is this busy, then she needs to hire someone. Whether or not Feyre enjoys the work or not is kind of irrelevant, because if she can't get it all done, then she's actually holding the Night Court back from making progress by not admitting she needs more help. If she just hired people to help her, then they could do more things. Why is she the one who has to answer the mail? Who was answering the mail before she showed up? Rhysand? Does he really have the time for that? Do you think the King of England answered his own mail? Seriously? It's so unbelievably stupid to me that there aren't secretaries or some kind of admin team to take care of things like this. Shouldn't somebody in the inner circle be handling this kind of stuff already? Instead of answering the mail, we learn that Feyre has been spending her time helping with various charities around the city to help rebuild Velaris after the war, which seems very odd to me because you'll recall that the war did not happen in Velaris. There was an attack in Velaris in the second book when the Adder and his cronies came, but that was long before the war ever happened, and there were no battles fought on Night Court territory during the war. Like, most of the battles happened in the Summer Court or like in the Border and the Spring Court Human Realm area. Like, they didn't see war in the Night Court. Sure, some of the Night Court citizens fought in the army, but that was mostly people from the Court of Nightmares and the Illyrian forces, not people in Velaris. Yes, there were some people from Velaris who willingly volunteered, but they were not conscripted like these other two armies. Frankly, the Court of Nightmares can go fuck itself. I don't think they need any charity. But what is Feyre doing for the Illyrians? Nothing? I mean, also the Illyrians can go fuck themselves, but why is she helping the people of Velaris when these other two groups were affected more by the war? What? I'm not saying that helping with volunteer work is wrong and that you have to, like, focus all of your energy on who's suffering the most, because at the end of the day, suffering is still suffering. But Feyre says she's out here helping to hand out coats and firewood. Literally anybody with hands can do that. Hell, this is Fairy World. They don't even have to have hands. They could just, like, float things around. I don't fucking know. Regardless, Feyre would be better off handling the mail and other political stuff because she's in a position of power, and it seems like she's the only one that can do that kind of thing since her pride won't allow her to hire a fucking secretary. So why is she out here handing out coats and firewood when she has specialized work she needs to do? Priorities, my friend, priorities. Like, what are you doing, girl? Feyre finally gets a hold of Rhysand, and he says that he's at the Illyrian war camp, so I guess he's taking care of that stuff while Feyre handles Velaris. That's giving Rhys a lot of credit, though, considering he hasn't really done much to enforce the rules he placed on the Illyrians in terms of treating their women better, but the narrative is going to try to pretend that he's doing all he can when he's not. You mean to tell me the strongest High Lord in all of history cannot defeat misogyny? What hope do the rest of us have then? God damn. The next chapter swaps to Rhysand's POV, which is also written in first person like Feyre's POV. This has happened a little bit selectively in other books, but there's a lot more POV changes in this one, and we also get other POVs like from Cassian, but his perspective is written in third person, whereas Rhysand is also written in first person like Feyre, which gets confusing because Rhysand doesn't really sound different from Feyre. And then we randomly switched to these third-person sections, and so it's kind of all over the place a little bit. I would have made Feyre the only first-person POV and everyone else third-person, including Rhysand, but the next book will resolve this. The next book isn't written entirely in third-person, which I think is much more effective, but we will get to there when we get to that book. Anyway, Rhysand is at the Illyrian war camp, allegedly taking care of business. The Illyrians suffered heavy casualties during the war, so they're still dealing with the fallout from all of that. We get some exposition about the Illyrians that shows exactly how they view their women. For the warriors, training in the various rings that opened onto a sheer drop to the small valley floor below, those not present out on patrol. For the males who hadn't made the cut, tending to various trades, whether merchants or blacksmiths or cobblers, and for the females, drudgery. They didn't see it as such, none of them did, but their required tasks, whether old or young, remained the same. Cooking, cleaning, child-rearing, clothes-making, laundry. There was honor in such tasks, pride and good work to be found in them, but not when every single one of the females here was expected to do it, and if they shirked those duties, either one of the half-dozen camp mothers or whatever males controlled their lives would punish them. Oh my god. I love that Rhysand speaks for the women and how they feel, but then he completely contradicts himself. He calls chores drudgery, but then says there's honor in doing that kind of domestic work. So is it a burden that the women hate, or do they take pride in it? He said both of these things. He also says that none of the women view chores as drudgery, but then says that the problem is that all women are expected to do chores. If none of them view the chores as problematic and view it honorably, then why is it a problem that all women are expected to do chores? Wouldn't they have accepted their place in Illyrian society and be fine with the dynamic if that were the case? Except the women clearly aren't fine with this, and whenever we see scenes of them, they're all suffering. They're not fine with this. So what is this narrative, Rhysand?
Well, you got me. By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
It's like he wants it to go both ways, and I know that in real life there are some women who enjoy and take pride in domestic work, and there are other women who would rather... and there are other women who would rather get a lobotomy than become a trad wife, but it kind of sounds like Rhysand is defending the Illyrians' traditional gender roles while also condemning them. He's like, oh, it's drudgery, but it's prideful. What? He wants it both ways, which is probably why he's never made any progress with helping the Illyrian women. So it had been, as long as I'd known this place, for my mother's people. The world had been reborn during the war months before, the wall blasted to nothingness, and yet some things did not alter. Especially here, where change was slower than the melting glaciers scattered amongst these mountains. Traditions going back thousands of years, left mostly unchallenged. Until us. Until now.
You serious?
How exactly are you challenging them, Rhysand? All Rhysand does is tell them to treat women better, but then he doesn't follow up on any of his initiatives, so then they don't treat them better. He's not instituting punishments for going against these, rules he's put into place, so nobody's following them. But still, Rhysand gives himself so much credit for what he's doing when he's not doing anything. And don't give me the excuse that change is slow. Rhysand is canonically the strongest High Lord in history and has insanely powerful mind control powers. He doesn't even have to brainwash the entire community into respecting women. He can just pick a few key leaders to brainwash to spread his message, and then that change seems like it'll happen relatively quickly. Is brainwashing people the most ethical way to make a change? Probably not, but it's also not ethical to treat women like indentured servants or outright torture them. It seems like the Illyrian women are just discarded like trash. How is not brainwashing more ethical than letting these women be treated like garbage? It had occurred to me, during the years we'd been waging this same battle with Devlin and the Illyrians, that I could simply rip into his mind, all their minds, and make them agree. Yet there were some lines I would not cross, and Cassian would never forgive me. What? Why is this the line you won't cross, Rhysand? Rhysand has no problem doing things like making Feyre drink fairy wine and then sexy dance for him under the mountain, kind of against her will. But he squeezes her broken arm to coerce her into letting him heal her. Oh, and also he's generally been pretending to be an evil psycho for hundreds of years, but somehow this is the line he won't cross? How many lines has he already crossed? And why would Cassian be mad about changing a culture that he also claims to hate? We get some exposition later on about how Cassian's mother was treated really, really horribly, so I think Cassian would be on board for, like, stopping the ill treatment of women at all costs. Don't feed me this shit about crossing a line. That's nonsense. Anyway, Rhysand and Cassian are at the Illyrian camp arguing with one of the leaders about how they aren't letting women train enough with the soldiers like they've been ordered to. Because I guess all Rhysand and Cassian do to enforce this is show up and bitch at them, they don't actually punish them. Apparently it's been decades since women have been technically allowed in the army, but since nobody actually listens to Rhysand, the Illyrian captains haven't followed through on actually letting women train. Cassian is especially adamant that women should be given more opportunities, but nobody respects him either, and in fact, they might like him less than Rhysand. So it's kind of a losing battle considering they're not going to actually punish them for not listening, so they're just not going to listen.
We've tried nothing and we're all out of ideas.
It had to be bad then, if my brother had asked me to come. Really damn bad. Perhaps we needed a permanent presence out here, until the Illyrians remembered things like consequences. But the war had impacted us all, and with the rebuilding, with the human territories crawling out to meet us, with other Fey kingdoms looking toward a wall-less world and wondering what shit they could get away with, we didn't have the resources to station someone out here. Not yet. Perhaps next summer if the climate elsewhere was calm enough. Why can't Cassian stay with the Illyrians and whip them into shape? Isn't he like the war general and their army is with the Illyrians, so what else does he have going on? What was Rhysand's excuse for not having a permanent presence with the Illyrians before all this war business started? I can rant about Rhysand's performative activism forever, but this is supposed to be a shorter video because this book is only like 300 pages long, so let's move on. We're told that there's growing unrest amongst the Illyrians after the casualties they suffered in the war, which is a problem that does not go anywhere in this book. It almost feels like the beginning of a civil war plotline, but it's never going to fully play out because SJM would then have to write another war, which is not her strong suit, so this goes absolutely nowhere. Rhysand finishes his argument with the captain about letting women train before walking away with Cassian. I jerked my chin at Cassian, indicating for him to follow me to the house across the camp that we now kept as our semi-permanent base of operations. There wasn't a surface inside where I hadn't taken Feyre, the kitchen table being my particular favorite thanks to those raw initial days after we'd first mated, when I could barely stand to be near her and not buried inside her. How long ago, how distant those days seemed. Another lifetime ago. I needed a holiday. I need a holiday from reading these fucking books. Part of the reason I don't like Rhysand's POV is seeing how much he sexualizes Feyre. It's normal to think about intimacy with your partner and to view your partner as being sexy, but Rhysand is so vulgar about it and he does it so frequently that it makes me feel gross. Like, I really don't need to think about him, like, wanting to be balls deep in Feyre. Like, you can think about your partner in a sexy way without literally being like, I want to be balls deep. Ew!
I don't need to know about that. You keep that to yourself.
Last week had been so stupidly busy, and I'd been so desperate for the feel and taste of her that I'd taken her during the flight down from the House of Wind to the townhouse, high above Valaris for all to see. If it weren't for the cloaking I had thrown into place. It required some careful maneuvering, and I'd planned for months now on actually making a moment of it, but with her against me like that alone in the skies, all it had taken was one look into those blue-gray eyes and I was unfastening her pants. A moment later I'd been inside her, and had nearly sent us crashing into the rooftops like an Illyrian whelp. Feyre had just laughed. I'd climaxed at the husky sound of it.
Disgusting!
What the fuck? Good thing Rhysand threw in that line about cloaking, or I would have a whole lot more to say about all of this. I'm actually kind of at a loss for words on this one, so let's just move on. Cassian and Rhysand talk about the growing tensions amongst the Illyrians. Cassian feels personal guilt for how many soldiers died in the war and says that some of the Illyrians believe that they were sent to the front lines as punishment, not for how poorly they treat their women, but for how poorly they treated Cassian, Azriel, and Rhysand when they were children. I haven't talked about it much, but those three are outcasts amongst the Illyrians for various reasons and are not well respected by them generally, so they were kind of treated like shit. And even without all of that context, this whole conflict is so stupid to me. The Illyrians are portrayed as this super badass warrior race who value strength above all else, and so why are they acting like little crybabies about being sent to war? What is all their training for if not to go to war? All they do is train for war, and then they go to war and they bitch about it? What? I know it sucks to have so many casualties and nobody wants to actually die in a war, but that's kind of the nature of war, and you would think that the Illyrians of all people would understand that. Is this just performative training? What?
That doesn't even make any sense!
Rhysand and Cassian talk about what to do about this political struggle, but since they don't actually do anything about it, I won't keep harping on this point. They start talking about the upcoming solstice instead and how Rhysand wants them all to spend it together. Before the cheery Christmas vibes can kick back in, Rhysand's PTSD kicks in instead as he remembers how Cassian almost brutally died in the war several times, and how they haven't really talked about it or dealt with it. Also, despite Cassian's declaration of love to Nesta, they haven't spoken, and Nesta has isolated herself from the rest of the group and is not doing very well. We're reminded that she's moved out of the townhouse and into her own shitty apartment across town, which Rhysand seems annoyed by, even though he hates Nesta and I would think he would be glad if she was around less. His main issue is that he doesn't like how much Feyre worries about Nesta, and he puts all of the blame for their strained relationship on Nesta, even though Feyre is far from perfect herself. Yes, I do think Nesta is the main driver in their bad relationship, but Feyre is not a saint, despite how she is portrayed. However, despite all of that tension, Rhysand insists that Nesta shows up to their fancy Christmas party that's going to happen later on. I spared him the discomfort of trying to mask his interest. Both sisters will be at the house, whether they want to or not. Nesta will make things unpleasant if she decides she doesn't want to be there. She'll be there, I said, grinding my teeth, and she'll be pleasant. She owes Feyre that much. Cassian's eyes flickered. How is she? I didn't bother to put any sort of spin on it. Nesta is Nesta. She does what she wants, even if it kills her sister. I've offered her job after job, and she refuses them all. I sucked on my teeth. Perhaps you can talk some sense into her over solstice. Oh wow, am I really gonna sit here and defend Nesta? Oh my god, is this the road to me liking Nesta or becoming a Nesta apologist? Ugh. I agree that on some level Nesta owes Feyre for the years Feyre supported them all through poverty and starvation, but at some point that needs to stop being thrown in her face. And none of that is any of Rhysand's business anyway. Also, I hate the line of, she does what she wants even though it kills her sister. Is Nesta supposed to make all her choices based on Feyre's feelings? Is everybody supposed to make their choices based on how their family or some other person feels about it? I do think Nesta could stand to be more considerate, saying the very least, but she can't live her entire life based on how it affects Feyre. Feyre is not the main character all the time. She might be in this book, but she's not the main character of the universe. It's also kind of annoying to me that Rhysand wants to involve Cassian in this conflict, even though he knows all of the shit that went down between him and Nesta and how they aren't really on speaking terms. Like, Cassian has no business getting into this sister drama, and neither does Rhysand. Cassian's siphons gleamed atop his hands. It'd likely end in violence. It indeed would. Then don't say a word to her. I don't care. Just keep Feyre out of it. It's her day, too. Because this solstice, it was her birthday, 21 years old. It hit me for a moment how small that number was. My beautiful, strong, fierce mate, shackled to me. I know what that look means, you bastard, Cassian said roughly, and it's bullshit. She loves you, in a way I've never seen anybody love anyone. Rhysand is seriously getting on my nerves right now. First he wants to get Cassian involved, and now he doesn't? Also, why is he trying to fix Feyre's relationship with Nesta behind her back without involving either of them? What do you mean leave Feyre out of it? This is her relationship with her sister! Rhysand needs to let Feyre and Nesta sort out their own shit. Rhysand has such a clear bias to Feyre's side that his involvement is only going to make things worse. Also, it's a huge ick to be reminded that Feyre is only 21 when Rhysand is over 500. If Rhysand wasn't a fairy and he was like a 60-year-old human who had gray hair and looked his age, then I think people would realize how weird this dynamic is. Like, Rhysand is not stuck in the perpetual mindset of, like, being 25. He is 500. Like, I mean, I guess he is stuck in the mindset of being 25 because these people are immature as hell, but it's weird, okay? I don't like it. Finally, the last thing I need is a subplot where Rhysand doubts his relationship with Feyre because of her age and how he feels that she's so shackled to him now and she's so young and blah blah blah, whatever. Feyre clearly loves Rhysand and is happy with him and has never expressed feeling trapped by him in any way. They are also mates, and the narrative heavily implies that mates stick together even if they aren't a good match. But Rhysand and Feyre are clearly a good match by this narrative standard, so I really don't need to see Rhysand mope over a problem that doesn't exist when there are other things to worry about. It is so unnecessary to question this relationship. There's no reason. She's turning 21. 21, Cassian. So? Your mother was 18 to your father's 900. And she was miserable. Feyre is not your mother. Ew, God, I hope not. And you are not your father. He looked me over. Where is this coming from anyway? Are things not good? The opposite, actually. I get this feeling, I said, pacing a step, the ancient wood floorboards creaking beneath my boots, my power a writhing living thing prowling through my veins. That it's all some sort of joke, some sort of cosmic trick, and that no one can be this happy and not pay for it.
Stop crying. It won't do any good. And anyway, you have a lot of work to do, starting right now.
Oh my God, Rhysand, shut the fuck up. I seriously can't deal with this kind of attitude. I know that Rhysand has had a hard and traumatic life, so being happy might be kind of new to him, but I hate this self-sabotaging nonsense. Get over it, my dude. You're 500. Surely a lot of those years were pretty good. Also, both Feyre and Rhysand have died during the course of their relationship, and all other sorts of horrible things have happened, so I'd argue they've already paid the price for their happiness, because they've kind of been suffering this whole time through all the war and all this shit. So, the price has been paid. Move on. Cassian gives Rhysand a big bro hug and hypes him up, which might be a sweet moment if I didn't absolutely despise both of these idiots. It's still a competition of who I hate most, and it kind of alternates between the two, but I hate them both, and I will always hate them both. Rhysand leaves, and the next chapter opens from Cassian's perspective, which I said before is in the third-person point of view. Despite my previous complaints about the POV changes and how it's kind of all over the place, I think that the books always should have had other perspectives other than just Feyre's. There's this big wide fairy world, so it's very limiting to only see it from Feyre's perspective because she doesn't really go very many places, and also the different perspectives would break up the monotony of Feyre's awful inner monologue that is so exhausting to read sometimes, and it would just give us the opportunity to see things play out that she wasn't present for. Like, it would be better if there was multiple perspectives this whole series. Anyway, we get some weird world building from Cassian on a point that I've always been kind of confused about. And since that would do little to help quell the murmurings of discontent, Cassian waited until Rhys had winnowed out into the snow and wind before vanishing himself. Not winnowing, though that would have been one hell of a weapon against enemies in battle. He'd seen Rhys do it with devastating results. Az, too, in the strange way that Az could move through the world without technically winnowing. He'd never asked. Azriel had certainly never explained. I've always been confused about the Illyrians' ability to winnow or not because it sometimes seems like they can and sometimes seems like they can't do it. And by the way, winnow means teleport. I've been using the word teleport throughout these videos because I hate the word winnow. And of course Azriel isn't going to explain why he can teleport or winnow or whatever, because then SJM would have to come up for a reason why he can do it and other people can't do it. It's weird. Why just make them all be able to teleport? Also, even though Cassian says he vanished, what he means is that he flew away. He didn't just randomly teleport through some other method. He flies off into the mountains, and one even gets a name despite how many other things in this series never get a name. The King of Hybern doesn't get a name, but this fucking mountain does.
I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed.
Ramiel, the sacred mountain, the heart of not only Illyria, but the entirety of the Night Court. None were permitted on its barren, rocky slopes, save for the Illyrians, and only once a year at that, during the Blood Rite. The Blood Rite has been mentioned in previous books before, but it was never something I covered because it wasn't relevant at the time and I didn't think it would ever become relevant. And it's not really relevant in this book, but it's very relevant in the next one. The Blood Rite is basically a super intense physical challenge where Illyrian soldiers in training have to scale the mountain with nothing but the clothes on their back. Like, they don't get their magic, they don't get to use their wings, they don't get to use any weapons, they just got what they can carry, I guess. Some people use it as an opportunity to take out their enemies because it's normal for people to die during the rite. And the concept of killing your own allies feels very Fourth Wing to me, but that's a whole mess I can't get into. I just don't have the strength. Just like Fourth Wing, you don't have to kill people to move on, but killing people could be beneficial to you. It's dumb. That's not how armies work. I don't really know what the exact point of the Blood Rite is, other than to show off your strength and prove that you are a worthy warrior, but Cassian says that it's also a way to let the Illyrians blow off steam and release tension, so they don't end up in a civil war, because I guess they're so, like, testosterone-filled, they're, like, constantly raging, and they just have to kill? What? Are these Illyrians really so stupid and brutish that they'd destroy their own society if left unchecked? I guess they're just so lucky that they got colonized and so that they can get, like, less brutish. Like, what the fuck? The Illyrians are portrayed as these backward savages that have no desire for change, and I'm starting to think that Illyria should be an entirely separate territory that is not part of the Night Court. Seems like that would make things easier for everyone. They should just go back before whatever the Night Court did to colonize them. Seems like they don't want to be colonized. They want to do their own thing. And Rhysand doesn't want to, police them anyway, so don't. Let them be on their own. We get a bunch of exposition about Ramiel, the Sacred Mountain, and Illyria in general as Cassian flies around, and I don't care to explain any of it. Cassian lands on another mountain that was once his home, but whatever camp or village or whatever that was there was destroyed long ago. We get a reminder that just like every other character in this series, Cassian has a tragic backstory. Oh, and also it relies heavily on the trauma of a woman. Long story short, Cassian was an illegitimate child of some Illyrian warrior who was famous or a captain or something, I don't know. And because he's a bastard, his mother was treated poorly as a result of, having this affair with a married man, I guess. And so everyone looked down on her. Cassian was sent off to the war camp for training, and when he returned to his village several years later, he learned that his mother had been worked to death, and then, her body was thrown off the side of the mountain instead of even getting a proper burial, because the women are treated like literal garbage! Out of rage, Cassian destroyed the village and killed everyone there, which I think should have made him an enemy to the Illyrians, but somehow he just got away with it with no consequences. Surely some of those people were innocent of the crime of, doing bad things to his mother. I don't think they're innocent in general, they're all kind of shitbags, but Cassian really was not punished for killing an entire village? What? He just got away with that? No wonder the Illyrians hate him! Centuries later, he didn't regret it. Standing in the snow and wind, surveying the emptiness where he'd been born, Cassian didn't regret it for a heartbeat. His mother had suffered every moment of her too short life. It only grew worse after she'd given birth to him, especially in the years after he'd been taken away. And when he'd been strong and old enough to come back to look for her, she was gone. They'd refused to tell him where she was buried, if they'd given her that honor, or if they'd thrown her body into an icy chasm to rot.
Jesus Christ.
Jesus Christ! Rhysand said Cassian would never forgive him for brainwashing the people into treating women as people and not trash, but I have a hard time believing that considering Cassian slaughtered a whole village of people for what they did to his mother. Cassian is okay with wiping out an entire village it's gone. There's not even buildings. The whole place is fucking leveled to the ground. But he isn't okay with a little mind control? Seriously? He's fine with mass murder, but not mind control? That's fucking stupid. Oh my god, okay, I know I'm getting spicy, but the lengths they are going to excuse this misogyny is well, they're just gonna do it anyway, can't help it. What? Why are we doing this? Why did SJM choose to write this? She could have just not wrote this in. She chose to write this. It pisses me off. It's annoying. Don't make excuses for misogyny. Fucking do better. Do better!
I hate this fucking shit!
So training these women, giving them the resources and confidence to fight back, to look beyond their campfires, it was for her. For the mother buried here, perhaps buried nowhere, so it might never happen again. So his people, whom he still loved despite their faults, might one day become something more, something better. The unmarked unknown grave in this past was his reminder. Yeah, I don't think I would still love my people after they threw my mom off a fucking cliff. Get real. Okay, whatever, let's just concede that Cassian still loves the Illyrians. Regardless, this is a pretty textbook example of the women in refrigerators trope, which I'm sure you've probably heard of, it's kind of a common one. It's where female characters face a disproportionate amount of harm, such as death or assault, in order to serve as a plot device to motivate male characters, and this often happens before the story even begins, so we don't see this woman as a character. She's already dead before the narrative begins, so her sole purpose is just to exist to motivate a male character to become a better person, which, I don't think it should take the death of a woman you care about to be a good person. Just be a good person. This all sort of implies that men don't have empathy for women's issues unless they have a woman in their personal life that has gone through horrible things. How often have you heard people make the argument of, what if it was your mother or sister or wife, when talking to men about women's issues? Women have inherent value as human beings without their relationships to men. You shouldn't have to think of someone as being related to you in order to care what they're going through. They're a person, whether they're your sister or your mother, they're still a person. I'll get off that soapbox now so we can continue through whatever the fuck this book is. Sorry guys, I'm pretty spicy in this video and
I'm going insane. Perhaps wacky. One might even say crazy.
The chapter ends with Cassian trying not to think about Nesta, and we get kind of an ominous statement that the destroyed village is a reminder of what Cassian is capable of doing when he's pushed too far, which, that's scary. When pushed too far, he can slaughter a whole village of people? I don't think SJM meant to make Cassian sound like Tamlin 2.0, but this makes me very worried for the next book that's about Nesta and Cassian. The next chapter switches back to Feyre's POV as she strolls around the Rainbow, which is Valaris' art district. Everyone's getting ready for Fairy Christmas, so the city is busy with people shopping and decorating, which this vibe change is so crazy. Okay. We're back to the Christmas stuff, no more trauma. We see more of the Lesser Fae, and those are the fairies who look much less like humans than the High Fae, which is something that was severely lacking in the previous books. Like, we really only saw High Fae and didn't really know what the Lesser Fae were up to. As much as I shit on this book, it does a good job of making Valaris feel like an actual city compared to the last book or the book before that one. It's just kind of weird that we waited this long in the series to do some more world building. The vibes switch back to trauma as Feyre thinks about the attack on Valaris that happened all the way back in ACOFAS, which feels like a century ago, and she thinks about how the city is still recovering from that trauma. Feyre still feels kind of disconnected from art because of all of that, so she feels kind of awkward about being at the Rainbow, like she doesn't deserve to be there or something, which is so self-pitying and dumb. Like, get over it, Feyre. I'm just kind of over all of these, like, rich, wealthy assholes feeling so sorry for themselves, and, like, I know they went through trauma, but frankly, I don't care. We get some exposition about how Feyre is freely able to explore the city despite being the High Lady, and how most people actually leave her alone instead of, like, constantly flocking to her and, like, causing crowds and stuff. A small mercy, though I certainly didn't mind being approached. As High Lady, I hosted weekly open audiences with Rhys at the House of Wind. The requests ranged from the small, a Fey light lamppost was broken, to the complicated, could we please stop importing goods from other courts because it impacted local artisans? I don't really understand how they're holding these meetings at the House of Wind, considering the only way to get up there is to be able to fly or to walk up 10,000 stairs. Like, how are these people getting up here to, like, give their complaints or whatever? Also, given how busy Feyre has said she is, does she really have time to do weekly sessions like that? Shouldn't they hire someone to take care of things like broken lampposts? I understand talking to the High Lord and Lady about trade issues, but they shouldn't be bothered about shit like city maintenance. There should be people for that. There should even be people for the trade stuff. I feel like SJM really doesn't understand how governments work, given how much work the leaders take on themselves instead of having teams to help them. Like, why are Feyre and Rhysand doing literally every job? There should be people for that. Feyre continues her exploring and we get more exposition about the city. Valaris was by no means poor, its people mostly cared for, the buildings and streets well kept. My sister, it seemed, had managed to find the only thing relatively close to a slum, and insisted on living there. In a building that was older than Rhys and in dire need of repairs. There were only a few blocks in the city like that. When I'd asked Rhys about them, about why they had not been improved, he merely said that he had tried. But displacing people while their homes were torn down and rebuilt? Tricky. What the fuck? I know I just said SJM doesn't know how governments work, but she also doesn't seem to know how the real world works either. If Valaris is such a wealthy city, then how is Feyre caught up in so much charity work all the time? I know the city is recovering from the attack, but it didn't seem like the damage was so bad that such a rich city would take so long to bounce back. And I know there was a war going on, but like most of the people in Valaris did not fight in the war. They should have been here patching up their city. Also, this whole slum area was a shithole before the attack even happened, and nobody did anything about it then because displacing people is too hard? Seriously? Rhysand is rich as fuck, so he absolutely could afford to house these people somewhere else while he fixes the area they live in. He has multiple houses, multiple big-ass palaces. He can't just, like, let someone stay there in a room while he fixes up their fucking house. What? How did these areas fall into disrepair while the rest of the city has been well-maintained? That doesn't make any sense. Rhysand seemingly gives up on making any changes the moment it becomes inconvenient for him, but we're supposed to see him as this benevolent feminist icon who'd do anything for his people. It's infuriating how much credit Rhysand gets for how little he's actually accomplished, especially with how often we are reminded that he's the strongest High Lord in history. He just gives up the moment any issue has any pushback whatsoever and we're supposed to give him ass pats for it? Fucking seriously? Oh, but don't worry. Just because Rhysand can't fix the slum for whatever reason doesn't mean he isn't helping out with all the other charity stuff. I hadn't been surprised 2 days ago when Rhys had handed me a piece of paper and asked if there was anything else I would like to add to it. On the paper had been a list of charities that he donated to around solstice time, everything from aiding the poor, sick, and elderly to grants for young mothers to start their own businesses. I'd added only 2 items, both to societies that I'd heard about through my own volunteering. Donations to the humans displaced by the war with Hybern, as well as to Illyrian war widows and their families. The sums we allocated were sizable, more money than I'd ever dreamed of possessing.
Tell you what, Bobby, what say we tally-ho it over to the money room?
Capital idea, Dad. Capital.
Bro, they really have all this money but randomly can't fix the one slum part of town in Valaris? That's weird. Also, if Feyre supposedly feels so bad about destroying the Spring Court, shouldn't she donate money to them so they can also rebuild? In the last book, Tamlin said that Hybern had destroyed all of the cities they had just rebuilt after Amarantha destroyed them, so why isn't Feyre helping them? Why isn't Feyre helping the Summer Court when they suffered through 2 huge battles? I don't think rich people should be expected to solve the entire world's problems, but I think Feyre could look outside her wealthy city and help other people. Especially the people in the Spring Court, considering she directly contributed to their downfall. And while most of that was Tamlin's fault, Feyre did play a role in that, and I think she should help the Spring Court people just a little bit. Feyre continues to wander the city and says that she started donating a portion of her monthly allowance to rebuild the art district, and at this point I'm ready to throw hands. What is happening? Why does Rhysand pay Feyre a monthly salary if they have joint assets and Feyre never has to worry about paying for food or clothes or anything for herself? Like, why does she get a salary? That's so weird. And since she doesn't have to worry about paying for her own things, why doesn't she use her entire salary to rebuild the art district? What is she doing with the rest of her salary? We are repeatedly told that these two have inconceivable wealth, so I don't understand why they don't have the money to fix all of their problems immediately. Obviously, labor is going to take time to rebuild everything, but money, like, why? I just don't understand the money thing. They constantly are talking about allocating money, but they have money to solve everything immediately. I'm over it. Let's move on.
Are you sure about that?
Feyre comes across a lesser Fae that she recognizes from the battle in Valaris all the way back in ACOFAS, and that was such a minor character I didn't even mention them, but they're back, I guess. Feyre talks to them about some boarded up buildings and what happened to the families who lived there. And one of the buildings is an abandoned art gallery, and you can probably already see where that little subplot is going, but it takes a whole long time to get there despite how short this novel is compared to the other ones. The Lesser Fae implies that Feyre should buy that abandoned art gallery, but Feyre is still angsty about art and she's not going to take her up on that offer yet. We finally learn that this Lesser Fae's name is Racina, and that she's an artist with her own studio there in the Rainbow. Racina offers to show Feyre around the art district whenever she wants and goes on to kiss her ass about how everyone respects her so much for fighting for them in the battle and, "Ooh, Feyre, we love you so much." Except Feyre can't let herself feel happy about anything, so instead of taking the compliment, she mopes about the people she wasn't able to save. I think we're supposed to see Feyre as humble and selfless, but to me she comes off whiny and tone-deaf, like, girl, just take the compliment. The scene ends with Racina inviting Feyre to her studio for her weekly painting group, but obviously Feyre isn't going to go because of her ongoing art angst. The next scene is more of Feyre wandering around Valaris to do some Christmas shopping. She's looking at a jewelry display when Mor shows up to chat, and I guess Mor exists in this book, she's just kind of randomly there sometimes, she's not around a lot. Feyre is hesitating on making a purchase, and this is what Mor has to say. Mor smirked. "You do know that we're well off, don't you? You could fill a bathtub with these things." She jerked her chin toward the egg-sized sapphire in the window of the jewelry shop, "and barely make a dent in our accounts." I wasn't joking earlier when I said that they have inconceivable wealth. It makes all of their charity work look extremely performative, but I've complained about that enough already. Feyre is looking at jewelry because she knows it'll make a good gift for Amren, and apparently Amren deserves an extra super awesome present for sacrificing herself during the war, even though it wasn't a sacrifice at all considering she came back to life. Oh, and also everyone is so quick to glorify Amren for what she did while completely overlooking the fact that Amren broke the cauldron and Rhysand had to die to fix it. It's probably easy to forget that since Rhysand didn't stay dead, but I certainly didn't forget. Would we still glorify Amren if the world ended because of the cauldron breaking? That's stupid! We get a throwaway line that Amren and Varian, that guy from the Summer Court, are now unofficially in a relationship. Good for them, I guess, but I don't care about either of those characters and stand by my opinion that Amren should have stayed dead. Feyre tries to ask Mor what she wants for Christmas, and Mor sort of dodges the question and says that she already has everything she wants. The narrative gives us a weird out-of-place reminder that Mor is hiding her gayness from everyone and that Feyre is such a good friend for keeping her secret. What a mess. I can't even begin to open that can of worms again. I'm over it. They keep talking about Christmas, and Feyre asks Mor what she usually gives as gifts. Come to think of it, Fairy Christmas must be hard to deal with considering how old these people all are. Giving one thoughtful gift is hard enough, let alone coming up with 500 of them. At some point the gifts would get kind of redundant, and they would have everything they would ever want. Mor kind of says what I just said to you, and that it doesn't really matter what kind of presents Feyre buys because Fairy Christmas is about more than just gifts. Which is basically the message of every Christmas movie ever, so that shouldn't come off as any surprise. It's about the Christmas spirit. It's not about gifts, even though there's so much Christmas shopping in this fucking book. Mor then ruins the Christmas vibe by telling Feyre that she didn't come find her so that they could chat. She actually came for a reason, and says that they have to go to the Hewn City, which is another term for the Court of Nightmares, because apparently it's tradition to go visit them during the holidays. If it's a tradition, then they would have known in advance that they were going, so why did Mor have to seek Feyre out to give her this information? Like, why did she randomly go find her in the city to tell her this? Shouldn't they have already discussed this? Why is Feyre just now finding out about this, like, the day of the visit? They didn't tell her in advance? We get an explanation that Mor randomly decided they would go that night because she didn't want to visit on the actual solstice and ruin their holiday. Feyre makes a mental note that they still have several days before the solstice, so they don't really have to go that night specifically, and she's kind of confused why Mor is like, we have to go now, and Mor is kind of acting weird about it. Mor goes on to explain that Eris will be there that night, and she wants to see for herself how much he's working with her super evil father and how much he's still on their side, or I don't really care about this Eris subplot, like, it doesn't really go anywhere. Feyre is like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense, I guess we'll go tonight. But it doesn't really make sense to me because Mor can't stand to be around Eris to the point that everything she says to him is some kind of snappy remark, so I'm kind of not buying now that she wants to be around him to see what's going on with him. If you don't remember, Eris is from the Autumn Court and he's Lucien's oldest brother. We've been told that Eris is super evil, but there's hints that maybe he's not and he's just pretending like Rhysand was pretending to be evil. Right now, Eris has a secret alliance with Rhysand in exchange for Eris convincing Keir, who is Mor's evil father and the leader of the Court of Nightmares, to lend his army during the war in the last book. Rhysand will now help Eris overthrow his father, the High Lord of the Autumn Court, so that Eris can become the High Lord. But again, that really doesn't go anywhere, so just kind of forget about that for now. The next chapter opens with Feyre snuggled up in bed relaxing before their visit to the Court of Nightmares, and Rhysand comes home for wherever he's been, and we get this confusing interaction between them. His Illyrian leathers gleamed with melted snow, and more of it shone on his dark hair and wings as he quietly shut the door. Right where I left you. I smiled, setting down the book beside me. It was nearly swallowed by the ivory down duvet. Isn't this all I'm good for?
What do you mean by that?
What does Feyre mean by that? That she's only good for bed activities? Why the hell would she say something like that after complaining about how she's busy all the time with her high lady stuff? She knows she's good for more than just bedroom activities, and I know this is probably a joke, but I don't like it, and I have no idea why she just said it. We get some banter between Rhysand and Feyre, and she suggests delaying going to the Court of Nightmares because of how tired Rhysand looks. He tries to play it off and wants to get frisky, but Feyre insists he needs to eat and goes to the kitchen to whip him something up. Rhys sat, folding his wings behind him before reaching to pull me into his lap, but I dodged his hands and kept a healthy distance away. Eat the food first. Then I'll eat you after, he countered, grinning wickedly, but tore into the food. The rate and intensity of that eating was enough to bank any rising heat in me at his words. Did you eat at all today? I'm cracking up at how Rhysand's feral eating gave Feyre the ick. I pictured him tearing apart a rotisserie chicken with his bare hands, like, really going at it, and Feyre's just sitting there like, ew, dude, ugh. Also, I said this before, but I feel like Rhysand's sexualization of Feyre absolutely skyrocketed in this book. It seems like that's really all he thinks about when he thinks about her, and that's all he wants to do when they spend time together. That might be a fine dynamic for their relationship if Feyre is down with that, but this behavior gives me the ick. He's constantly pawing at her whenever they are together, and I just don't like it. He comes off as a sex pest, and I don't like it. That's not for me. Feyre fusses over Rhysand for not taking care of himself and making time to eat, because Rhysand just cares so much about other people, and he's so selfless, and he doesn't take care of himself because he's taking care of other people. Ooh woo, like, ugh. The conversation turns in a really weird direction as they talk about how Rhysand fusses over Feyre during her cycle, and by cycle they mean period. This caught me off guard because I never considered they would talk about periods, but here we are! Apparently fairy periods are exceptionally painful, and Rhysand dotes on Feyre during that time, even going so far as to spoon-feed her. As much as I hate Rhysand, I have to admit that's kind of cute, but fairies only get periods twice a year rather than monthly, so it's not a huge commitment on his part. In place of those monthly human discomforts was a biannual week of stomach-shredding agony. Even Madja, Rhys's favored healer, could do little for the pain short of rendering me unconscious. There had been a point during that week when I debated it, the pain slicing from my back and stomach down to my thighs, up to my arms, like living bands of lightning flashing through me. My cycle had never been pleasant as a human, and there had indeed been days when I couldn't get out of bed. It seemed that in being made, the amplification of my attributes hadn't stopped at strength and fey features. Not at all. Damn, I must be a fairy because that pretty much sounds like what I go through, and I won't get TMI and say any more about that. I don't really know why fairies have these awful periods, but I just realized there's kind of a plot hole here. Rhysand has said before that he is capable of mentally blocking people's pain, and specifically he did it when that random girl Claire was tortured so she wouldn't suffer, so why can't he mentally block Feyre's pain for her? If Feyre considered being rendered unconscious, then surely she would agree to having her pain mentally removed so she could just carry on with her day. Hell, with her mind control powers, maybe Rhysand can teach Feyre to mentally block her own pain or the pain of other people, and Feyre can go do that for people. Oh my god, what if he specifically doesn't do that so that he can take care of her during her period and look like a hero and like step in for her when he could have just ended her suffering before? Okay, this is devolving into conspiracy theory territory, so let's move on.
Okay, people, move along. There's nothing to see here.
Along with the implication of that blood, at least the contraceptive brew he took was working. But conceiving amongst the Fae was rare and difficult enough that I sometimes wondered if waiting until I was ready for children might wind up biting me in the ass. I hadn't forgotten the bone carver's vision. How he'd appeared to me. I knew Rhys hadn't either. The vague contraceptive potions in romantasy books will never not crack me up, but I do want to give brownie points for male birth control existing in this world. I'm a big fan of that. Also, the fairies are basically immortal in terms of aging, so I don't know what Feyre is talking about when she says waiting might bite her in the ass. They never established that the Fae lose fertility at a certain age, like human women over 40 typically are not going to be having babies. It doesn't really seem like there is an equivalent for the fairies. So they have nothing but time, and I know all the war trauma might freak them out into thinking that they don't have time, but that's only because they don't know they're in a book and they aren't aware of their own plot armor. Oh, and the vision Feyre refers to is of the bone carver showing her what her future son would look like, and since he's never been shown to be wrong, I don't know why Feyre is even worrying, because it seems like it's basically set in stone that she will have at least one child. But he hadn't pushed, or asked. I'd once told him I wanted to live with him. Experience life with him, before we had children. I still held to that. There was so much to do, our days too busy to even think about bringing a child into the world. My life full enough that even though it would be a blessing beyond measure, I would endure the twice-a-year agony for the time being, and help my sisters with them too. Considering Feyre is just about to turn 21, I'd sure hope that Rhysand isn't pushing her into having children before she's ready. I'm 28, and I don't feel anywhere near ready for kids, and I don't think I want children at all. And I know that everyone has their own timelines, but considering Feyre is immortal now, there really isn't any reason to rush. Feyre and Rhysand have only been together for like a year at most at this point, so they really should wait to have children, and they should have waited to get married, but I guess they're mates and they're like, oh, we're perfect matches, we should get married, but like, wait on the children. Why are we forcing this children thing? That is just such a super big pet peeve of mine in a romance novel when the characters get together and then immediately have children. I just don't like it. Feyre says that it was awkward to talk to her sisters about their fairy periods and that Elaine was super embarrassed by it all. Apparently Nesta didn't react, and Feyre is worried that she won't ask for help and will try to endure the pain on her own, which is probably exactly what would happen. Like, it's Nesta, of course she's not going to ask for help. Elaine, at least, would be too polite to send Lucien away when he wanted to help. She was too polite to send him away on a normal day. She just ignored him or barely spoke to him until he got the hint and left. As far as I knew, he hadn't come within touching distance since the aftermath of that final battle. No, she tended to her gardens here, silently mourning her lost human life, mourning Grayson. How Lucien withstood it, I didn't know. Not that he'd shown any interest in bridging that gap between them. This is precisely why Lucien is one of the only characters I like. He is refreshingly respectful when it comes to not pushing boundaries and feeling entitled to Elaine despite them being mates. So what Feyre says about him not being interested kind of pisses me off. Lucien is clearly interested in Elaine, or he wouldn't keep trying to interact with her. Just because he isn't barging into her life and forcing her to spend time with him doesn't mean he isn't interested. It means he's being respectful. And while Lucien absolutely isn't entitled to Elaine or her affection, I feel really bad for him that he got paired with a mate that isn't crazy in love with him. I feel like Feyre doesn't understand that not all mates are like her and Rhysand, and just how privileged she is to have that kind of connection with him. Feyre tells Rhysand that she's thinking about Elaine and Lucien, and Rhysand asks if Lucien is coming to Fairy Christmas in a way that implies that he doesn't want him to show up. Feyre asks if that's a problem that Lucien does come, and Rhysand finally says that he can stomach being around him. I really don't understand this weird grudge Rhysand has against Lucien. Sure, Lucien has affiliations with Tamlin in the Spring Court, but Lucien isn't even originally from there. He only went to the Spring Court to escape his evil family in the Autumn Court, and he didn't know that Tamlin was kinda crazy before he showed up. He stuck by Tamlin through some shit he shouldn't have, but what was the alternative? Lucien had nowhere else to go, like this was kind of his only choice. He's also repeatedly helped Feyre and has saved her life at least once, considering she would have died in the last book if he didn't join her on her hike across Prythian to get back to the Night Court, and I'm sure he's saved her life in other circumstances that I just can't remember. So, Lucien is not perfect, but I don't understand why Rhysand hates him so much, and Rhysand just needs to grow up and, leave Lucien alone. Lucien didn't really do anything that bad, in my opinion. A half smile that had me walking toward him, stopping between his legs. He braced his hands idly on my hips. I can let go of the taunts, he said, scanning my face, and the fact that he still harbors some hope of one day reuniting with Tamlin. But I cannot let go of how he treated you after Under the Mountain. I can. I've forgiven him for that. Well, you'll forgive me if I can't. Icy rage darkened the stars in those violet eyes. You still can barely talk to Nesta, I said. Yet Elaine you can talk to nicely. Bro, what the fuck? Rhysand is the king of snarky remarks, so he doesn't really have any right to say that Lucien taunts too much. Rhysand is the king of taunting. Shut up, Rhysand. Don't dish it if you can't take it. Also, does Lucien really want to go back to Tamlin? I haven't really seen any indication that that is true, and even if it was, we were told in the last book that Tamlin isn't actually evil, so there shouldn't be a problem with rebuilding that relationship one day. All of the High Lords need to get along, so they kind of need Lucien to be the peacekeeper with Tamlin. Also, why are we blaming Lucien for what happened after the mountain? Tamlin was the one who abused Feyre, and he's big and strong and terrifying. Yes, I think Lucien could have and should have done more to help Feyre, but he was also kind of being abused by Tamlin, so I don't really know what anyone expected Lucien to do. Lucien can't beat Tamlin in a fight. Finally, if Feyre has forgiven Lucien, then there's no reason for Rhysand to hold a grudge on her behalf. That is toxic as fuck to act like you are owed an apology for something that didn't even happen to you. That is Feyre's business and she's over it, so Rhysand needs to get on board with that. You cannot be angry on other people's behalf for shit that didn't happen to you. That is weird. And the Nesta stuff is the exact same deal. Elaine is Elaine. If you blame one, you have to blame the other. No, I don't. Elaine is Elaine, he repeated. Nesta is... She's Illyrian. I mean that as a compliment, but she's an Illyrian at heart, so there is no excuse for her behavior. She more than made up for it this summer, Rhys. I cannot forgive anyone who made you suffer. Cold, brutal words, spoken with such casual grace. I don't even know what Rhysand is going on about here about Nesta being Illyrian and so she has no excuse for her behavior. The Illyrians are notorious for their awful behaviors, so if anything that justifies how Nesta acts. If Rhysand really wants Feyre and Nesta to have a good relationship, then he needs to be able to forgive Nesta and move on from the past. Again, he doesn't even have anything to forgive Nesta for because she doesn't owe him an apology for how she treated Feyre. Rhysand is not a part of this equation. He is owed nothing. Holding a grudge over things that didn't even happen to you is making yourself the center of someone else's story, which is selfish. Feyre says that Nesta is her family, so Rhysand has to forgive her, and Rhysand asks if that should be his Christmas gift to Feyre, I'm gonna forgive Nesta and that's your gift. I really do think that Nesta should have taken more responsibility and that as the eldest sister, she really should have stepped up. But so should Elaine, and it's not fair that Elaine gets a pass while Nesta is crucified for all of this. They changed the subject and Feyre talks about her day and Racina, that artist she met. Feyre says it feels selfish to paint when there's still so much to do around town apparently and she's just so busy. But Rhysand encourages her to pursue her art again. I want to give him credit for that, but I just can't after his childish behavior with Feyre maintaining relationships with people he doesn't like. The narrative wants to act like Rhysand is so supportive, but he isn't really, at least not unconditionally. The subject changes again as they talk about the solstice and how it's also Feyre's birthday that day. Rhysand reminds her that the solstice is the longest night of the year, which must mean it's fate that they ended up being mates because he's the High Lord of the Night Court and whatever, she was born on the longest night. Feyre thinks that's hot, but I think it's weird and possessive and,
Ew, this is so cringe. Guilty.
He traced the seam of my backside with a long, lazy stroke. With me standing before him like this, he could instantly smell the shift in my scent as my core heated. I just had to include this passage because I straight up died laughing picturing Rhysand credit card swiping Feyre's ass crack. Like, that's just too funny. Like, who does that? Like, just casually strokes your partner's ass crack. Like, oh my god. They talk some more about how much they love each other and all that sappy stuff, and then they start to get spicy. Rhysand says that all he wants for Christmas is a week with Feyre, and I'm sure you can imagine what he wants to do the entire time. I'm sure that's supposed to come off as hot, but the concept of giving your body to someone as a gift really grosses me out. It just feels wrong to me. Sex is supposed to be a mutual act, not something that is gifted, and I just really don't like viewing it from that way. Like, it just feels weird. They're about to get down and dirty when Mor knocks on the door to remind them that they have a visit with the Court of Nightmares that they need to get to. Rhysand pouts like a horny teenager before going to take a cold bath to calm down, and I really couldn't have more of an ick for him right now. Like, literally the way he's pouting and moping and then has to go take a cold bath is just like, it's ew. His total desperation for sex is not hot to me at all. The next chapter is in Mor's perspective as the gang goes to the Court of Nightmares. The place is decorated for Christmas, but that doesn't really make it any less dark and creepy because the place is essentially a cave, so it's a Christmas cave! We get a bunch of exposition about how much Mor hates the Court of Nightmares and how bad it makes her feel to be there, and I still don't understand why Rhysand doesn't just mist the whole place and be done with it all. If this place is so awful and everybody hates everyone there and hates being there, then get rid of it. We then get even more exposition about how much Mor hates Eris, and we get a random flashback to what happened between them in the past. The Cliff Notes version is that Mor broke her engagement with Eris by sleeping with Cassian, and her family was so furious they tortured her and dumped her on the Autumn Court border. Because apparently that ruined the political marriage that was supposed to bind the Court of Nightmares with the Autumn Court, so they were real mad about that. And the flashback that we see here is to the moment when Eris found Mor laying there on the border all busted up and then decided to just leave her there to suffer, I guess. But it's kind of implied that there is like a good reason why he left her there and he's not evil, but we never find out what that is. We don't often get flashback scenes like this, so this felt very random to me, just like how this entire visit to the Court of Nightmares feels very random. This whole plot point with Eris doesn't ever really go anywhere, and it feels especially pointless in this book, so I don't need all this. The group has a tense conversation about nothing in particular, and then we get this weird comment from Mor. It had once been her delight to taunt Keir in this court, to keep them on their toes. Hell, she'd even snapped a few of the steward's bones this spring, after Rhys had shattered his arms into uselessness.
What did he say?
Had been glad to do it, after what Keir had said to Feyre, and then delighted when her mother had banished her from their private quarters. An order that still held, but from the moment Eris had walked into that council chamber all those months ago... What the hell? Mor went down to the Court of Nightmares to break her dad's bones for fun? I'm not saying the guy doesn't deserve it, but it's messed up that Mor's acting all high and mighty when she also casually tortures people. I truly don't understand this dynamic between the Court of Nightmares and the Court of Dreamers, which is the stupid name Rhysand calls his inner circle. I would be angry and bitter too if I was stuck in a scary cave and this random asshole shows up sometimes to break my bones. I probably wouldn't be very nice to those people. Either the Court of Nightmares needs to get wiped out, or these two groups need to fully separate from each other and not, like, interact at all, because what they're doing now is not working and everyone seems miserable about it. Feyre and Rhysand casually threaten Eris to keep his father, the High Lord of the Autumn Court, in check because they're worried he might try to expand his territory into the human realm now that the wall is gone that separates those two realms. That doesn't really seem likely though, considering the Spring Court is between the Autumn Court and the human realm. So it makes way more sense that Tamlin would try to take over the human realm, and Eris even says, like, yeah, why you should be more worried about Tamlin. Except even that doesn't also really make sense because Tamlin barely has a court after all his horrible choices and Feyre's scheming, so he really doesn't have the resources to go colonize the human realm. And the narrative has never really given us any reason to believe that he'd want to do that. Tamlin only allied with Hybern so he could get Feyre back, not because he believed in human slavery. I think the more likely scenario here is that the Autumn Court takes advantage of the Spring Court's weakness, colonizes them, and then colonizes the human realm afterwards. Like, they should be worried about that outcome. The chapter ends with Mor realizing she hasn't said a single word during the meeting despite being the liaison between the Court of Nightmares and the rest of the Night Court, and she feels bad about not contributing anything. I still really don't know why they went at all, considering it doesn't really seem like they learned anything from Eris or, like, accomplished anything, but it happened. The next chapter is from Rhysand's perspective, and he's meeting with Azriel to talk about some spy stuff. We get a bunch of exposition about Azriel and his backstory that I don't really care to explain. All you really need to know is that Azriel is an outcast amongst the Illyrians, and he really doesn't like them, where Cassian likes the Illyrians, Azriel absolutely does not. Azriel studied the map for a long minute. I gave him the silence, knowing that he'd speak only when he was damn well ready. As boys, Cassian and I had devoted hours to pummeling Az, trying to get him to speak. He'd never once yielded. "The Illyrians are pieces of shit," he said too quietly. I opened my mouth and shut it. This actually had me cracking up, because even though Azriel says that the Illyrians are pieces of shit, the way this passage is structured makes it seem like he's actually calling Cassian and Rhysand pieces of shit, and they definitely are. Like, he's recalling this memory of being beaten by them, and he's like, oh, I hate these people.
I hate the shit out of you!
Anyway, you'll recall from earlier that there's some tension amongst the Illyrians and Rhysand because of the war, even though they're warriors, and they're being babies about fighting in a war, even though they're warriors. So Azriel has been doing some spying to make sure that they aren't planning a civil war or a rebellion or something, and Azriel says exactly what I was thinking earlier. Shadows gathered around his wings, trailing off him and onto the thick red rug. They train and train as warriors, and yet when they don't come home, their families make us into villains for sending them to war? Their families have lost something irreplaceable, I said carefully. Azriel waved a scarred hand, his cobalt siphon glinting with the movement as his fingers cut through the air. They're hypocrites. And what would you have me do then? Disband the largest army in Prythian? It makes absolutely no sense that the Illyrians train and train and train and then do the blood rite where some of them die, but then draw the line at going to war and having soldiers die there. It's like they just want to hang out in their camps and cosplay as warriors instead of actually being warriors. Like, I don't understand why they had this reaction. As for the solution, Rhysand, I would suggest letting Illyria do its own thing, considering you aren't actually dedicated to improving their society, and they seem to resent you. All of your resources go to Valaris, and these people kind of live in squalor, so, like, get rid of them. Let them do their own thing. Rhysand says he won't disband the Illyrians because, quote, they have nowhere to go, and that forcing them to leave their land will cause the civil war that they're trying to avoid by doing all of this. Dude, who's saying anything about kicking them out? Just let them have their land back and do their own thing. Valaris seems to be the only actual city in the Night Court, so it's not like Rhysand needs the land. He can just make some kind of deal with them to give them their independence in exchange for behaving themselves and not causing this civil war. What Rhysand really needs to do is find a way to create his own army. He's said to be so powerful and all that, but when push came to shove, he didn't have any troops of his own. He had to coerce the Court of Nightmares into lending their army, and the Illyrians resent him for using their troops, so Rhysand needs his own army that he is solely in control of. It kinda just seems like he has control of two groups that loan their armies to him, and he doesn't have his own army. The structure of the Night Court is such a fucking mess, and it makes no sense to me that there hasn't been a civil war already. Rhysand is lucky as hell that the Court of Nightmares and the Illyrians haven't joined forces to destroy Valaris, because he'd really have no way to stop them. There's also tension in the human realm because apparently the queens are still in hiding after all that war nonsense went down, and I don't know if any of their citizens know they allied with Hybern. Like, I really don't know what the human citizens believe happened in this war, and I don't really care. What's left of Hybern obviously isn't happy about losing the war, and those other random fairy countries that were trying to ally with Hybern might go attack the human realm now that the wall is gone. So Rhysand can't rock the boat with the Illyrians too much because he might need them again soon if war breaks out again. And again, Rhysand just needs his own army at this point. Side note, Rhysand and Asriel agree not to tell Cassian how bad the situation is with Illyria because he feels more connected to the Illyrians than either of them do, and they don't want to ruin Christmas for him with all this drama. Bro, that is so stupid, I want to jump headfirst into a brick wall. I am so tired of these idiots hiding information from each other for no reason. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever to not keep everyone in the loop, especially if a civil war might happen. Like, fuck your feelings, you're 500, you can deal with feelings, you need to know this information. Who cares about ruining Cassian's Christmas when he's had 500 Christmases? Surely it's not that special. Rhysand and Asriel talk about what to do about the human realm, and I don't care to cover it in depth because it doesn't go anywhere in this book, and I doubt it goes anywhere in the next one either. Basically, their plan is to let Vassa, the queen that went missing because she got cursed to be a firebird, and Jurian, that one human guy, handle it. Rhysand doesn't want to get overly involved with the humans because it'll look like he's trying to conquer them, and he doesn't want to put that image out, and I kind of understand that. But now that the wall is gone, I do think he owes the humans some kind of protection, and he should be a little bit more proactive about all of this. Send Lucien, then, as our human emissary. I studied the tenseness in Asriel's shoulders, the shadows veiling half of him from the sunlight. Lucien is away right now. Az's brows rose. Where? I winked at him. You're my spy master, shouldn't you know? Az crossed his arms, face as elegant and cold as the legendary dagger at his side. I don't make a point of looking after his movements. Why? Not a flicker of emotion. He is Elaine's mate. I waited. It would be an invasion of her privacy to track him. To know when and if Lucien sought her out, what they did together. You sure about that? I asked quietly.
You sure about that? That's why?
Oh god, not the Lucien, Asriel, Elaine love triangle nonsense. Not that it's even really a love triangle because Elaine doesn't want anything to do with Lucien, and while she's nice to Asriel, she's still mourning her human life too much to be with anyone. Asriel seems butthurt about Lucien being Elaine's mate, but at least he leaves them both alone, so okay Asriel, good for you, bro. Rhysand goes on to say that Lucien went to the spring court for Christmas because apparently Tamlin knew that Lucien would be alone on Christmas and invited him to come spend time with them, and I don't know why he assumed he'd be alone. I guess Tamlin knows that Lucien isn't really a member of the Night Court, even though he's kind of staying with them. They then switch topics to talk about Elaine's fairy-hating ex-fiancé Grayson, and Asriel kind of pretends not to care about him, and I don't have to pretend, I just don't care about him. They think Grayson might also be able to help with whatever needs to happen in the human realm and want Lucien to go talk to him. But that means going to the spring court because that's where Lucien is, and apparently they need to tell him, these orders right now and can't just wait until after Christmas. It's really just an excuse to go see Tamlin and make sure he has no plans to expand his territory into the human realm, as if he even would have a chance to do that considering he doesn't really have troops anymore. When I finished, Az picked at an invisible speck of dust on the leather scales of his gauntlet. The only sign of his annoyance. I can go with you. It's good to know that Rhysand isn't the only dusty boy around here. Somebody get the Bat Boys some lint rollers, cause they are constantly picking dust off of shit. Rhysand turns Asriel down and says he'll go alone, which is probably for the best because Asriel is even more violent than Rhysand and has outbursts very easily, and even Cassian more so, I guess. Rhysand says that he'll give Feyre the choice if she wants to come with him because Feyre always has a choice, but he's sure she won't want to go and I'm sure she won't want to go either. They change the subject again to talk about Bryaxis, which is the creepy pit monster from the library that Feyre made a deal with to get its help in the war. All it wanted was a window to be added to its pit because it considers the pit its home, but I guess it didn't go home after the war for some inexplicable reason and has just been roaming the lands. Asriel says he has no idea where Bryaxis is and hasn't heard a whisper, or more appropriately, a scream from it. I chuckled. My brother had a sly, wicked sense of humor. I'd planned to hunt Bryaxis down for months now, to take Feyre and let her track down the entity that, for lack of a better explanation, seemed to be fear itself. But as with so many of my plans for my mate, Running this court and figuring out the world beyond it had gotten in the way.
What the fuck is going on in here on this day?
What the fuck is even happening? Is it really okay to let such a dangerous creature just roam around? How isn't that taking priority over Feyre's stupid charity work? Someone else should be handing out coats while Feyre deals with Bryaxis. Anyone can do what Feyre's doing right now, but only she can deal with Bryaxis since it kind of likes her and she has that deal with it already. Their priorities are so out of whack that it's infuriating. Like, why is this creature allowed to just exist around? Like, what? They really don't feel like they need to catch it? They agree to let Bryaxis do its thing for now for some reason. I guess it's not a problem, and they're gonna handle some other business instead. Rhysand says that he'll leave for Rose Hall, which is apparently the name of the Springcourt Manor, even though I don't think we've ever heard it called that before now. And he says that he'll go the day after Christmas. The next chapter is from Cassian's POV, and he's at the Illyrian camp preparing for a huge storm that's coming. He goes into a store and immediately notices that the woman running said store has had her wings clipped, but it's unclear if it happened before or after Rhysand supposedly outlawed wing clipping because that was never something he actually enforced. We learn that the shopkeeper's name is Emery and that she's taken over for her father who died in the war. Cassian notices that the store across the street is sold out of everything while Emery's store is still full of stuff. And I think that the implication here is that nobody wants to buy from a shop ran by a woman. And honestly, I'm surprised that the Illyrians even allow women to own or run businesses at all. And it's not surprising, though, that they would rather freeze to death in a storm than buy something from a woman. God forbid. It certainly seems like it's your shop, he said at last, turning his attention back to her. Emery had drifted a few feet away, her back straight, chin upraised. He'd seen Nesta in that particular pose, too. He called it her "I will slay my enemies" pose. Cassian had named about 24 poses for Nesta at this point, ranging from "I will eat your eyes for breakfast" to "I don't want Cassian to know I'm reading smut." The latter was his particular favorite. That's such a long and goofy way of saying that Emery reminds Cassian of Nesta. Also, I'd like to see a list of all 24 poses, because that sounds like a lot. I'm not sure I even have one signature pose. Cassian buys all of the winter clothes in the store, and we get a line about how most Illyrians hate him, so much that they won't do business with him, and like he's grateful that Emery is selling him stuff. It's been repeatedly said that the Illyrians hate Cassian, Azriel, and Rhysand, but I find it exceptionally weird that Cassian is the leader of their army despite that. Don't you have to trust and respect your leader to be an efficient army? These people won't accept Cassian's money for business without spitting on it, but they'll listen to his commands in war? They will put their lives in his hands? Really? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
I don't understand. I don't understand, bitch.
Cassian tells Emery about the upcoming storm because for some reason Cassian knows about the storm and other people don't or something. And he asks her to deliver the clothes to whoever she thinks need them the most. I love that Feyre is handing coats out all willy-nilly in Valaris, but the people in Illyria just happen to get lucky that Cassian still cares about them even though they hate him. Like, why wasn't anybody handing coats out here already? It seems like they need the coats more. Emery seems hesitant about giving out the clothes and says that a lot of the Illyrians don't like her, which should have been clear because they didn't just buy the coats from her in the first place. But Cassian says that they don't like him either, and to tell everyone it's a gift from the High Lord, except they also don't like Rhysand, so I don't see why that would make them any more willing to accept a coat.
I don't understand. I don't understand, bitch.
Emery agrees to give out the clothes, and then Cassian leaves. What a riveting chapter. So interesting. We're back with Feyre in the next chapter, and we're told that it's 3 days before Christmas, and the shops are packed with last-minute shoppers. Feyre is on her way to Racina's art studio, and Racina is that random fairy she met in the streets a few chapters ago, if you've already forgotten. Feyre is nervous about painting in a group setting because that's such a private thing for her, and Rhysand checks in with her through their mental connection. It's supposed to be sweet, but I think it's kind of creepy that he can essentially monitor her thoughts and emotions. I won't harp on that too much since Feyre can technically shield him out if she wanted to, but I don't really like this kind of invasive, I don't like this. He told me where he planned to go tomorrow, what he had planned to inquire about. He'd asked me if I'd like to go with him. I'd said no. I might owe Tamlin my mate's life. I might have told Tamlin that I wished him peace and happiness, but I did not wish to see him, speak with him, deal with him. Not for a good long while. Perhaps forever. Wait, didn't he say he was gonna see Tamlin after the solstice, but we just were told it's 3 days before the solstice? Why is he going so soon? Am I just confused? Did I miss something? Also, I'd typically agree with Feyre's sentiment and say that she doesn't owe Tamlin shit and should never have to see him again. but she is the High Lady of the Night Court, so she might have to see Tamlin again in a political context, like the meeting with the High Lords that happened in the last book. At the very least, I think they need a few years apart to cool off after everything that happened, but they do eventually need to be able to, like, exist in the same room together. But for now, nobody's really been given enough time to heal, so I understand not wanting to see him anytime in the near future. Feyre is too nervous to go paint with everyone, so instead she teleports into the abandoned building from before. She cleans it up a little and then gets to work painting. She needs a lot of privacy to paint, so she doesn't even do it at the townhouse that she shares with Rhysand, because I guess he might see her paint and like, ooh, that sucks. So this abandoned building is perfect for her. I love that she just breaks in and squats there instead of purchasing it from the owners, who have already offered to sell it to her, I think. She's richer than God, but she's gonna use this building for free after breaking and entering. What a girl boss! Feyre paints her heart out and lets out all the creative energy that she's been repressing. I'd be a lot more happy for her if she wasn't currently trespassing, but pop off, Feyre. She can't take her paintings with her because the paint isn't dry yet, and she also doesn't want anyone to see them, so she just kind of leaves them there in the building. It's really funny to picture the owner coming in to check on the place and finding all these paintings, especially if you consider my headcanon that Feyre is a terrible artist. Like, imagine going into your building and some squatter left a bunch of shitty paintings. Like, it's too funny. The next chapter is in Rhysand's POV as he visits the spring court. Since it's a seasonal court, I'll remind you that they are in perpetual spring, so there is no snow, but all the flowers and greenery at the manor are all wilted and dying, and it's not looking great. The place looks kind of abandoned, and the vibes are not good. There are claw marks that are obviously from Tamlin, like all over the building, and Rhysand kind of deviously smirks and wonders if his visit will cause Tamlin to do even more damage to the place, like when he gets in a rage. The fact that Rhysand is smiling about this is kind of disturbing to me. I know that he hates Tamlin, and I hate Tamlin too, but it's wrong to outright delight in the suffering of others, especially the suffering of a powerful leader who could really fuck things up if he wanted to and was pushed too far. Silence. Then Tamlin answered the door himself. I wasn't sure what to remark on. The haggard male before me, or the dark house behind him. An easy mark. Too easy of a mark. To mock the once fine clothes desperate for a wash. The shaggy hair that needed a trim. The empty manor. Not a servant in sight. No solstice decorations to be found. The green eyes that met mine weren't the ones I was accustomed to either. Haunted and bleak. Not a spark. Good lord! This is pretty much what Tamlin deserves after all of his horrible decisions, but it's still rough to see. Remember, this was the main love interest in book 1, so I'm sure there's a lot of Tamlin fans that are, like, really sad by this. Rhysand thinks about how easy it would be to finish the job of fully crushing Tamlin's spirit, but decides that's the wrong thing to do while they're still trying to establish peace after the war. Oh, but he's totally fine with doing it after they get peace, which makes no fucking sense, because then that could trigger another conflict after they just achieved peace. What the fuck, Rhysand?
Stop it. Get some help.
The Night Court really just needs to leave Tamlin alone. No matter what someone does to you, you can't stay on the moral high ground if you go out of your way to fuck with them after you've parted ways. It's like Rhysand wants drama, and now that he doesn't have it, he's ready to pick another fight to get some more drama. That's toxic as hell. Leave Tamlin alone. Like, what are you doing?
Leave Brittany alone! Please.
Tamlin says that Lucien told him that Rhysand would come, and I don't know how Lucien knew because he was already gone when Rhysand told Azriel he planned on going to the Spring Court to talk to Lucien. Like, where is Lucien? Isn't he still supposed to be here? Like, what is happening? Rhysand says that he came to chat as they walk through the manor, and he realizes that Lucien didn't go to the Spring Court to try and reconcile with Tamlin, but he came out of pity. Which, like, duh, obviously. The whole manor is just as trashed on the inside as it is on the outside. It's like not looking great. Personally, I don't have a lot of pity for someone with such explosive anger to the point that they would damage their own property, but maybe this is the rock bottom Tamlin needs to finally change his ways. Or it'll make him even worse. I guess time will tell. Tamlin tells Rhysand that if he's there to gloat, then to just get it over with already. Rhysand can pretend all he wants that he's there to check on the border, but we all know he's there to kick Tamlin while he's down. Rhysand's response is, why bother, which kind of feels like gloating to me, and then he goes ahead and asks where Lucien is, and like, where is Lucien? Tamlin says that Lucien is out hunting for dinner, and it's kind of wild that things at the Spring Court have gotten that bad that he's like out there hunting to be able to eat. I don't know if Tamlin can't go to a store, or if there are no stores, or if they won't sell to him, or like what is going on, but it's not good if he has to resort to hunting. Like, whenever they eat at Rhysand's palace, he just kind of snaps his finger and food just appears, so, like, I don't know why Tamlin can't do that, whatever. Rhysand doesn't feel bad for Tamlin, and while I don't feel bad for him either, Tamlin isn't just some guy. He's a High Lord. It's really, really bad for his court to be this unstable, especially when he's the one closest to the human realm. Whether anyone likes Tamlin or not, they should help him rebuild for their own self-interest, so someone who's way more evil doesn't swoop in and take Tamlin's territory. I crossed an ankle over a knee and leaned back in my chair. What's this I hear about you not enforcing your borders? A beat of quiet. Then Tamlin gestured toward the door. Do you see any sentries around to do it? Even they had abandoned him. Interesting. Feyre did her work thoroughly, didn't she? A flash of white teeth, a glimmer of light in his eyes. With your coaching, I have no doubt. I smiled. Oh no, that was all her. Clever, isn't she? As I've said numerous times, the collapse of the Spring Court isn't Feyre's fault, but she definitely accelerated how fast it happened. Rhysand continues his taunting and thanks Tamlin for reviving him after he died in the war in a way that definitely does not come off as, like, a sincere thank you. If I was Tamlin, I would have let that bastard Rhysand stay dead. Fuck Rhysand. No, he can stay dead. Tamlin already doesn't have any allies left, so he had nothing to lose by not agreeing to revive Rhysand, so, I would have left him dead. I have no illusions that the day you thank me for anything, Rhysand, is the day the burning fires of hell go cold. Poetic. A low snarl. Too easy. It was far too easy to bait him, rile him, and though I reminded myself of the wall, of the peace we needed, I said, You saved my mate's life on several occasions. I will always be thankful for that. Except I don't think Rhysand is actually grateful considering he showed up here in the first place to taunt Tamlin before Christmas, and what Rhysand says next confirms it. I knew the words found their mark. My mate. Low. It was a low blow. I had everything I'd wished for, dreamed of, begged the stars to grant me. He had nothing, had been given everything and squandered it. He didn't deserve my pity, my sympathy. No, Tamlin deserved what he'd brought upon himself, this husk of a life. He deserved every empty room, every snarl of thorns, every meal he had to hunt for himself.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Dude, Rhysand, calm down. I know Tamlin sucks and all, but you and Feyre would both be dead without him, multiple times over, I'm sure. Tamlin saved both of their lives, even after they totally destroyed his life, so he really doesn't deserve this level of vitriol from Rhysand. Not only did Tamlin revive Rhysand during the war, but he also saved Feyre in that random scene where Elaine gets kidnapped by Hybern, and Tamlin even had to reveal to Hybern that he was a spy in order to help Feyre in that moment. I'm not saying everyone should just forgive what Tamlin did, because it's kind of unforgivable, some of the things he did do. But at this point, I don't know what he can even do to earn anyone's forgiveness if saving their lives isn't enough. They bicker about protecting the border, and Rhysand says that if Tamlin doesn't have any troops to do it, then he'll send some of his own. Never mind the fact that Rhysand doesn't technically have his own troops either, and he has to rely on two groups, the Illyrians and the Court of Nightmares, who both hate him. If Rhysand's not careful, then he'll end up just like Tamlin with everyone turning against him, and I don't see how he doesn't realize that. What? Tamlin doesn't want Rhysand's troops on his land for obvious reasons, so they bicker some more about all of that. Rhysand insists that they need to keep the peace, but Tamlin rightfully points out that there is no peace. Just because they won the war doesn't mean there's any peace. The only thing that changed as a result of the war is that the wall that separated the realms is now gone. Hybern or any other potential enemies didn't make any kind of agreement not to pick any more fights, so they definitely are not in a time of peace right now. Tamlin goes on to say that he doesn't want any, quote, Night Court brutes in his land, and the word brute immediately triggers Rhysand. Rhysand launches into how Tamlin ruined his own court, and then they bicker about how Tamlin treated Feyre as if that's really any of Rhysand's business. He wasn't involved in that relationship. Just stop getting involved. I wasn't finished. Not even close. You deserve everything that has befallen you. You deserve this pathetic empty house, your ravaged lands. I don't care if you offered that kernel of life to save me. I don't care if you still love my mate.
I don't care that you broke your elbow.
I don't care that you saved her from Hybern or 1,000 enemies before that. The words poured out, cold and steady. I hope you live the rest of your miserable life alone here. It's a far more satisfying end than slaughtering you. Feyre had once arrived at the same decision. I'd agreed with her then, still did, but now I truly understood. I'm not saying that Rhysand needs to drop to his knees and kiss Tamlin's ass for saving him and Feyre, but treating Tamlin this way is absolutely insane and frankly evil. Tamlin is already suffering the consequences of his actions, so he really doesn't need Rhysand to show up and heckle him about it, especially unannounced, uninvited, and right before Christmas. I swear Rhysand likes having drama with Tamlin, and it's almost like he's trying to incite Tamlin into doing something crazy, which is evil! Tamlin clearly isn't mentally well, so Rhysand has to know that his harsh words might make Tamlin do something extreme, especially now that Tamlin has nothing left to lose. This all feels very insidious, and like Rhysand has motivation to try to make Tamlin look like a bad guy by provoking him, and Rhysand, go home! Tamlin tells Rhysand to get out, and Rhysand almost seems disappointed that he wasn't able to provoke Tamlin into fighting him, and again, I kind of wonder if that was Rhysand's plan all along. He shows up to the spring court under the guise of checking in on the border, he provokes Tamlin to a fight, and then kills him in alleged self-defense, and then he's able to occupy his territory. It's a genius plan, really, but obviously that's not Rhysand's plan, because he's not actually evil, apparently, but I stand by the fact that Rhysand is evil. He didn't bother to look at me again. Get out, was all he said. A broken male, broken from his own actions, his own choices. It was not my concern. He did not deserve my pity. But as I winnowed away, the dark wind ripping around me, a strange sort of hollowness took root in my stomach. Tamlin didn't have shields around the house, none to prevent anyone from winnowing in, to guard against enemies appearing in his bedroom and slitting his throat. It was almost as if he was waiting for someone to do it. As much as I hate Tamlin, I find no joy in seeing someone pushed to this level of despair. I know I'm starting to sound like a broken record, but Rhysand is such a douche for all of this. Side note, I'm aware that Rhysand also hates Tamlin so much because Tamlin was at least partially responsible for the deaths of Rhysand's mother and sister, but the narrative is so vague about that event and how that went down that I wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't actually Tamlin's fault that all of that happened. The only thing we were told is that Tamlin told his father where Rhysand's family would be, and then his family ended up dead. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's any confirmation that Tamlin knew they would be killed or helped kill them, in any way whatsoever. He might have innocently given his father this information not knowing that Rhysand's family would be killed, I don't actually know. But you'd think that as a literal mind reader that Rhysand would peek into Tamlin's head to see how much he was actually involved with all of that, but I guess he never does, for reasons? Whatever, that's all in the past and I don't care about it. The scene ends and we hard cut back to Valaris, still in Rhysand's POV as he tracks down Feyre while she's finishing up her Christmas shopping, because that's all she does in this book is go Christmas shopping. He tells her everything that just went down with Tamlin, and she dismisses the awful things that he said to Tamlin by saying that she's heard him say worse things to Cassian? What? Good lord, I really hope that Rhysand hasn't said worse things to Cassian. Not because I like Cassian, because I fucking hate Cassian, but because that makes Rhysand even worse than he already is. He kind of told Tamlin to kill himself, and I really hope Rhysand hasn't said anything that bad to Cassian, who is actually his friend. What? Why are we justifying any of this? This is weird. Rhysand admits that he went to the spring court to taunt Tamlin in addition to checking on the wall, and he even admits to thinking about killing Tamlin, which freaks Feyre out. Feyre kind of backpedals about excusing what Rhysand had said to Tamlin before, and she's like, well, you're not technically wrong, but it is kind of fucked up. Rhysand starts to say that he should have been the bigger man, I mean male, since that's the stupid word they use, and Feyre is immediately defending him again. She says that since Rhysand usually acts like the bigger person, that he's entitled to a slip-up every now and then. Excuse me? Entitled? Nobody is entitled to verbally berate someone, especially after showing up to their house uninvited and unannounced while they're going through a crisis. The way Feyre defends and justifies Rhysand's horrible behavior is infuriating. He is a terrible person and his anger issues are just as bad as Tamlin's. Rhysand just isn't as physical about it. I will forever stand by the fact that Rhysand is not an improvement, he is a lateral move from Tamlin. He is not better than Tamlin. Rhysand gives Feyre a kiss and they part ways so that he can do some Christmas shopping of his own, I guess. Everybody's Christmas shopping in this fucking book. He goes to a jewelry store to buy some stuff from Amryn, and then the chapter mercifully ends. Jesus Christ, what a mess. I never thought I'd be so glad to be back to Feyre's POV. The Rhysand chapters are easily the worst part of this book for me, and he's back on the top of my shit list. Fuck that guy. Fuck Rhysand.
I hate this fucking shit!
Cassian shows up to the townhouse with some decorations, and he gets drunk with Feyre as they decorate. The fluffy scenes like this would actually be enjoyable and kind of cute and lighthearted if we didn't just get that really, really sad and depressing shit about Tamlin. This series has always had a conflict with tone, like in random shifting, but this book is, I think, worse than the other ones in that regard. Also, I kind of hate to admit it, but I think that SJM really thrives with writing these lighthearted, fluffy scenes, and I wish she had toned down the scale of the conflict in this series and kept it more fun and easygoing. I know a story needs a conflict or it's not really a story at all, but a conflict doesn't have to be as major as a war to keep a story going. SJM isn't good at writing about political turmoil or battles or anything of the like, so I wish she would have stuck to her strengths and written a different plotline for these characters. I don't know if there's a such thing as cozy romantasy, but if there is, I think ACOTAR really would have thrived in that genre, and maybe I wouldn't hate it so much. I would, kind of lean into the cuteness, but as it stands, I hate it. By the time Asriel shows up, Feyre and Cassian are already really drunk and acting very silly, and again, this scene would be so much cuter if it wasn't such tonal whiplash from Tamlin's horrible depressive suffering. Rhysand, Mor, and Amren also show up, and we get a pretty funny line about how Amren's puffy white coat makes her look like an angry snowball. Amren then immediately sours the mood, as she always does, by randomly mentioning Nesta, and everyone is clearly uncomfortable by that. Amren merely grinned, those red lips spreading wide enough to show most of her white teeth as she stalked toward the front hall closet and said over her shoulder, "I'm going to enjoy seeing her shred into you. That's if she shows up sober." And that was enough. Rhys seemed to arrive at the same idea, but before he could say something, I cut in. "Leave Nesta out of it, Amren."
Don't be fucking rude.
I was actually kind of enjoying this scene before Amren showed up and threw Nesta under the bus for her alcoholism completely unprovoked. Nesta isn't even there, and she's still the butt of the joke. No wonder she moved out and never sees these people. They're assholes! She was the closest with Amren out of any of them, and Amren has nothing good to say about her anymore. Amren's only response to being told to back off is to tell Feyre to deal with Nesta because her new boyfriend Varian is gonna be at Christmas and Nesta can't be making a fool of herself, or whatever. Dude, fuck Amren. She should have stayed dead. Ugh. Varian. Who gives a shit about Varian if he's there? Why does that matter? Amren sucks. Of course she ditched Nesta and now acts 1,000 times bitchier now that she has a boyfriend out of nowhere. Okay. The next scene is of Feyre and Elaine talking in the kitchen. Feyre asks Elaine if she's heard from Nesta, and Elaine says no, she hasn't. Feyre kinda awkwardly says that Elaine clearly knows Nesta the best and asks if it's worth showing up to Nesta's house to go get her. And that shows just how much Feyre doesn't know a damn thing about Nesta. Or people in general, really. Showing up at someone's house after they turn down your invitation obviously isn't going to make them magically change their mind and want to go to your party. They already said no. Elaine says that if Nesta wanted to be there, then she would have come, exactly, and that going to get her is going to be more trouble than it's worth. We get some exposition about how Elaine is still healing from her war trauma too, and how they put up a symbolic grave for Papa Archeron that she visits quite frequently. Of course, Nesta has never been, and I don't blame her. I wouldn't go either if I were her, and it's not Feyre's place to police how Nesta chooses to grieve. It's not really any of Feyre's business if Nesta chooses to go to their deadbeat father's grave or not. Based on the tone of the conversation between Feyre and Elaine, it seems like something might have happened between Elaine and Nesta. Nesta said she didn't want to come to Solstice. That's fine, even though something in my chest twisted a bit. She said she didn't want to come to anything. Ever. I paused, scanning the pain and fear now shining in Elaine's eyes. Did she say why? No. Anger. There was anger in Elaine's face, too. She just said that we have our lives and she has hers. To say that to me, fine. But to Elaine? Oh my god, I really can't believe how hard I'm about to defend Nesta right now. It's like somehow everyone forgets that Nesta also has trauma from the war, and they act like she's behaving the way she is just because she's a bitch, and not because she's clearly suffering. I mean, don't get me wrong, Nesta is a bitch, but she's also obviously not mentally well right now, and I don't know how anyone doesn't see that. Regardless of what's going on, Nesta doesn't have to go to the Christmas celebration just because Feyre and Elaine want her to go. Feyre and Elaine can be upset about that all they want, but Nesta is an adult who can make her own choice. If she doesn't want to go, she doesn't have to. Feyre and Elaine carry the food from the kitchen to the dining room, which is weird because sometimes it seems like they physically prepare food and sometimes it feels like the food just appears, but they're carrying the food. It's whatever. Feyre tells Elaine that she'll talk to Nesta, but Elaine tells her not to bother, which is very out of character for her to be so dismissive of something like that. Feyre asks Elaine if she's okay, but Elaine plasters on a fake smile and says she is, and that's especially weird for Elaine to do. But before Feyre can dig any deeper, they make it to the dining room where everyone else is gathering around the table. Everyone except Asriel greets Elaine, and it's kind of tense for a moment while he just kind of stares at her. Asriel, dude, tone it down, you're being weird. He politely takes the dish that Elaine was carrying, and she's all flustered about like him being a gentleman, and she scurries back to the kitchen to go get more food. Everyone else is already starting to make their plates and eat, but Asriel catches everyone off guard when he demands that they stop and wait for everyone to be seated, and by that he means Elaine. I think it's supposed to be a cute moment between them of like, oh, everybody needs to respect Elaine and wait for her before we eat dinner, but he's acting kind of aggressive about it, which comes off the wrong way to me, and I don't like it. Rhysand and Feyre have a telepathic conversation about what just happened, which, again, I say this every time, but their telepathic conversations feel very rude to me. Anyway, Rhysand says that Asriel is sensitive about how his mother was treated like a servant, and he must not have liked that Elaine was kind of being treated like a servant in that moment. But really, I think it's just because he wants to see what that mouth do. The mood is lightened when they all start eating, and Amren complains about having to eat real food now. You'll remember from the previous books that before she was resurrected into a Fey body by the cauldron, she drank blood as nourishment, which she says is much more convenient to do instead of eating food. Also, apparently when she drank blood, she didn't produce any waste, if you catch my drift, and she finds that whole situation difficult to deal with. I mean it, Rhysand, Amren snapped. I didn't dare meet Mor's stare, or Cassian's. One look and I'd completely dissolve. Amren waved a hand down at herself. I should have selected a male form. At least you can whip it out and go wherever you like without having to worry about spilling on... Cassian lost it, then Mor, then me, and even Az chuckling faintly. You really don't know how to pee? Mor roared. After all this time? Amren seethed. I've seen animals... Tell me you know how a toilet works, Cassian burst out, slapping a broad hand on the table. Tell me you know that much!
Brother,
There's nothing quite like talking about pissing and shitting over a nice roast dinner for Christmas. What riveting conversation! Elaine naively asks Amren if she could actually have chosen a male form, and Amren confirms that she could have, and I don't know how she could have. Oh, she could if she wanted to, I guess. She says that she chose a female form because it appealed to her more, and girl, me too. Elaine asks some more questions about it, and it's pretty clear that she's trying to figure out if there's any way for her to turn her Fey body back human again, and Amren even calls her out for it. But Elaine tries to play it off like, no, I'm just curious, I'm not asking about that. Things are all weird now, and yet again Amren has totally killed the vibe, and yet again I will complain about her not staying dead. Rhysand tells Amren to shush, and Cassian tells her to pick on someone her own size. Asriel then jumps onto the Amren dog pile to say that he'd feel bad for the mice. Get it? 'Cause Amren is so ooh-woo tiny that if she was to pick on someone her own size, it would have to be a mouse. Ha ha ha, very funny. Everyone laughs and is happy again, and then the scene ends, and what a weird. Weird!
It's not funny, it's not funny, it's not funny, it's not funny, it's not funny!
Even though that last scene was really light and happy and it ended on such a good note, the next scene is a total buzzkill because we cut to Feyre standing outside Nesta's apartment even though she was just told by Elaine not to go there. Feyre just can't help herself and has to meddle in everyone's business no matter how many times she's told not to. I really don't think Feyre is going with the intention of checking on Nesta at all, but is just gonna bitch at her about coming to the Christmas celebration. Nesta isn't home, so Rhysand uses one of his many powers to find her, because apparently he has some kind of tracking something now. I don't know what he did, but he magicked and found Nesta. So he teleports himself there with Feyre. There are wine rooms in this city, Rhys said, cringing. There are concert halls, fine restaurants, pleasure clubs, and yet my sister managed to find the seediest, most miserable taverns in Valaris. There weren't many, but she patronized all of them. And this one, the Wolf's Den, was by far the worst. Considering that Feyre often refers to herself as a wolf to hype herself up, it's really hilarious to me that the worst bar in town is called the Wolf's Den. Like, I feel like wolves have been given a really positive connotation in this series, and now all of a sudden, like, fuck wolves, it's a terrible place. If Rhysand is gonna turn up his nose at places like that, then he should just gentrify that part of town already so he can stop complaining about it. Also, if Nesta was going to fancy wine rooms, then they just complain about her spending their money on expensive booze. Like, at least she's going to the cheap places. Feyre wisely knows that Rhysand is only going to make everything worse because, like, he hates Nesta, and for good reason, and Nesta hates him for good reason. So the chapter ends as Feyre goes in to confront Nesta, even though she should have just stayed home. Both of them should have just stayed at home. Everyone should just stay at home! Feyre goes into the bar and finds Nesta drinking and playing cards with a random group of fairy men. My sister didn't have drinking companions. As far as I knew, she went out alone and made them as the night progressed. And every now and then, one of them went home with her. I hadn't asked, wasn't even sure when the first time had been. I also didn't dare ask Cassian if he knew. They had barely exchanged more than a few words since the war. If Feyre didn't ask, then how does she know these things? I doubt Nesta told Feyre any of this, especially the stuff about taking someone home with her. Like, how does Feyre know this stuff? We go on to get a long description about how Nesta has lost a bunch of weight but is still well-dressed and groomed despite living in the only bad part of Valaris. Don't worry, just because she lives amongst the bums doesn't mean she has to look like a bum herself. Feyre also comments that the guys Nesta is with also look well-dressed, so they probably aren't from that part of Valaris either. I guess poor people all dress like slobs or bums in Feyre's opinion, and maybe she hasn't been handing out any fancy coats in this neighborhood, because why would she? She only helps the more fortunate, not the less fortunate. Like, what is charity for? Nesta notices Feyre but doesn't really acknowledge her. The men Nesta's with all awkwardly bow their heads and seem uncomfortable, even though Feyre is supposedly super involved with the citizens of Valaris, and she earlier said how comfortable they all are around her, but these guys clearly are not. I smiled sweetly at her companions. I hate to interrupt your night out, gentlemen. Gentle males, I supposed. A holdover from my human life. One that the third male noted with a hint of a raised, thick brow. But I would like a word with my sister. Gentle males? Seriously? This has to be trolling by SJM because that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Gentle males? I'm losing it! The men leave and Feyre immediately asks Nesta which one she's taking home with her, as if they didn't just leave. How would she take one home? They left. And also, that's such a bitchy and judgmental way to start a conversation. Like, way to come out swinging. That's how to win someone over. No wonder Nesta doesn't want anything to do with Feyre if that's how she talks to her. Nesta icily answers that she hasn't decided yet which one she wants to take home, and then they enter an awkward staring competition. Side note, Rhysand and Feyre have been mentally communicating this whole time, even though Rhysand didn't go into the bar so they could have some privacy. Like, I think he's still standing out in the street or something. Which is kind of weird. Like, go home, Rhysand. I really think he needs to butt out and leave Feyre alone right now, but I guess he just can't help himself. Dude, like, this is a sister thing. Just let them figure it out. Nesta finally breaks the silence to ask if Rhysand's gonna stand in the cold all night, which she obviously assumes that he's out there waiting for Feyre, because obviously he is. Feyre seems taken aback by that, as she wouldn't spend every waking moment with Rhysand if she could, and like, she has to know they're codependent and always together. Considering Rhysand hates Nesta and isn't shy about it, I can see why Nesta would have a strained relationship with Feyre if he's always around, because he's always gonna be making like little sly comments and stuff. Even now when Rhysand is supposed to be giving them space to figure their stuff out, he's still communicating with Feyre instead of just letting her handle her business alone. He really needs to butt out. Feyre deflects away from the Rhysand comment and confronts Nesta about not showing up at their fancy dinner earlier. Nesta's smile was slow, sharp as a blade. I wanted to hear the musicians play. I cast a pointed look to the band, more skilled than the usual tavern set, but not a real excuse. She wanted you there. I wanted you there. Nesta shrugged. She could have eaten with me here. You know Elaine wouldn't feel comfortable in a place like this. She arched a well-groomed brow. A place like this? What sort of place is that? I always harped on Nesta being way more considerate of Elaine than Feyre, but Feyre does the exact same thing. She also puts Elaine over Nesta. Why is Elaine so much more important than her sisters? Why is Nesta expected to show up to a place she clearly isn't comfortable at while Elaine gets a pass for the same thing? Nesta definitely would not feel comfortable at a party like that, but she's expected to go, and Elaine isn't expected to do anything. Feyre lamely says that Elaine doesn't like crowds, and Nesta points out that that didn't used to be the case, which clearly means that before they went through the horrible trauma of becoming super hot fairies, Elaine was okay with crowds. Feyre takes this as a personal attack because she feels personally responsible for her sisters being turned into super hot fairies, even though I really don't think that she should feel guilty for that, and Feyre counters that actually Elaine is doing great, and maybe Nesta would know that if she bothered to show up. Okay, that's fine and all, but are we just going to ignore that Nesta clearly isn't doing well herself? Good for Elaine for healing and moving on, but not everyone works on the same timelines. She was basically catatonic for the entire last book, and all of a sudden Nesta can't have a time to be down, really? Feyre is acting like Nesta is being an unreasonable bitch just because she feels like it and, is totally disregarding everything that Nesta has gone through. Again, don't get me wrong, Nesta is a bitch, but Feyre glosses right over how much she's clearly suffering and how much she went through. She straight up watched her father get his neck snapped and then also threw herself over Cassian thinking that they were both gonna die together. That is pretty traumatic. Of course Nesta is fucked up right now. Feyre finally comes out and says that she wants Nesta at Fairy Christmas, and she'll even bribe Nesta if that's what it takes to get her there. Nesta planted the tip of her pointer finger atop her stack of cards and fanned them out across the table. It's not even our holiday. We don't have holidays. Perhaps you should try it. You might enjoy yourself. As I told Elaine, you have your lives and I have mine. Again, I cast a pointed glance to the tavern. Why? Why this insistence on distancing yourself? She settled back in her seat, crossing her arms. Why do I have to be part of your merry little band? You're my sister. Again, that empty, cold look. This is a detail from the first book that I'd totally forgotten about, and Nesta has a point here. There are no holidays in the human realm, so none of them have any connection to solstice because they've never celebrated it before. It's not like Nesta is stepping out of a yearly family tradition that would deeply hurt her sisters. They don't celebrate this holiday. They have no nostalgic connection to this. There is no sentimental reason for any of them to meet up on solstice because they don't celebrate solstice. It means nothing to them. Also, it's annoying how Feyre expects Nesta to fall in line and join her friend group as if they don't openly hate and disrespect Nesta. I hate the inner circle and I wouldn't want to spend any time with them either, and Nesta shouldn't have to just because Feyre is her sister. I don't hang out with all of my sister's friends, and that's an insane thing to expect someone to do. I doubt Feyre is willing to hang out with whatever friends Nesta makes at the bar, so it feels like a double standard. Why does Feyre get to decide who Nesta keeps her company with? I know Nesta is coming off a little harsh here, but she has a point. She has her own life, and she shouldn't be expected to live the way Feyre wants her to. It seems like Feyre only wants a relationship on her terms, and she isn't able to meet Nesta where she is or compromise in any way whatsoever. Feyre is kind of just as controlling as Rhysand. Oh my god, I never thought I'd become a Nesta apologist, but Feyre sucks so much that I can't help myself. Right now, Feyre pisses me off more. If SJM hadn't written Nesta to be the most heinous bitch alive in the first book, then I'd feel less conflicted about kind of liking her now. God damn it! I don't want to like Nesta! Nesta stands her ground and says that she is not going to Solstice. Feyre tries to guilt trip her by mentioning their recently deceased father, and Nesta is quick to cut her off, because that is such a low blow. Why would you do that? Their father is clearly a trigger for Nesta, so I don't understand why Feyre thought bringing him up would help anything or win Nesta over. Feyre realizes she's fighting a losing battle, so she turns to leave, and then Nesta finally agrees to take the bribe. My rent, Nesta said when I'd walked 2 steps. I paused. What about your rent? She swigged from her glass. It's due next week, in case you forgot. She was completely serious. I said flatly, come to Solstice and I'll make sure it's delivered.
Wait a damn minute. Wait a damn...
Okay, maybe I kind of see Feyre's side a little bit now. Nesta can't just move out of her sister's house into her own apartment, but then not get a job and expect her sister to pay her rent and all of her expenses. It doesn't matter that Feyre is richer than God, that doesn't entitle Nesta to spending her money. Feyre feels responsible for her sisters and that's why she pays for them, but I don't think she's responsible for them becoming hot fairies, so she shouldn't have to forever carry the burden of supporting them. She already spent years and years doing that in the human realm, and here she is again, still supporting them all. At some point, these two need to stand up on their own feet. Nesta really can't grandstand about how they live their own separate lives and they should just be able to do whatever they want, and then ask Feyre for rent money. She doesn't get to play it both ways when it's convenient. If you're taking money from someone, you do kind of owe them the courtesy of going to dinner. The chapter ends there, and the next chapter is from Rhysand's POV, which is so exciting. We get some more exposition about how Velaris is still rebuilding after that attack that feels like ages ago now, and why are we still talking about that? That was 2 or 3 books ago. Rhysand walks with Mor by the river past a bunch of abandoned fancy houses, and I wonder why he couldn't just temporarily move people out of the slums to here while he fixes up the slum part of town. I'm sure those people wouldn't be mad about living in a mansion for a little bit while their shitty apartments are made a little less shitty. Like, there seems to be a solution for this problem, and nobody's gonna do anything about it. Whatever, we've covered that already. We get some exposition about how Rhysand and Mor's relationship is kind of strained after all the fuckery that went down during the war and with Eris and all that shit that I just do not care about. I frequently forget that Rhysand and Mor are supposed to be cousins, because they never really explain how they're cousins, they just are. If you don't remember from the last book, Rhysand agreed to let Kyr, who is Mor's super evil father, have access to Valaris in exchange for using his army in the war. Kyr hasn't visited Valaris yet, but he will be coming soon, which has Mor kind of stressed out. Perhaps I had brought this upon myself, by enforcing the hewn city's borders for so long. Perhaps their horrible traditions and narrow minds had only grown worse while being contained. It was their territory, yes, but I'd given them nothing else. No wonder they were so curious about Valaris. Though Kyr's desire to visit only stemmed from one need, to torment his daughter. Oh my god, is Rhysand actually having a moment of self-awareness? While he wasn't the one who set up the deal that separated the Court of Nightmares from the rest of the Night Court, he can clearly see what a terrible place the Court of Nightmares is, and all he does is make it worse. Rhysand shows up randomly to torment them, and then is surprised when they hate him and act like total shitbags to each other. I would also be pretty pissy if some guy randomly showed up and broke my arm. The Court of Nightmares is a cesspool, and it needs to be misted once and for all. Like, get to work, Rhysand, just mist him. Why haven't we done that yet? Rhysand and Mor change the subject to talk about Christmas presents because, oh yeah, Christmas! Yeah, we're happy now! And Rhysand says that he still doesn't have a gift for Feyre because she's really hard to shop for. I think he should just give her some art supplies and call it a day, but that didn't go so well when Tamlin did that a few books ago, so I can see why Rhysand is having trouble finding a gift. They change the subject again to talk about political stuff, and Rhysand says that he needs Mor's help making connections with all the other fairy countries that apparently exist, but we never see. Rhysand says that he'll deal with the Court of Nightmares while Mor is gone, and I don't really see why Mor was ever put in charge of the place to begin with, considering she can't stand to be there, so, like, this is a way better job for her. Mor weirdly seems kind of hesitant about the new job, and Rhysand tells her to consider the offer because of course it's her choice what she does. It's always everybody else's choice. Rhysand doesn't tell people what to do. Except then Mor points out that it's not like Rhysand has anyone else he can ask to do the job, so she actually really doesn't have a choice. She's kind of being voluntold that this is what she needs to do. But of course Rhysand still pretends that this is somehow Mor's choice, and then the chapter ends there. Riveting. We're back with Feyre in the next chapter, and it opens with her admitting she also doesn't have any gift ideas for Rhysand. Like, he doesn't know what to get her, and she doesn't know what to get him. Because what do you buy for people who already have everything they could ever want? Feyre and Elaine, of all people, wander around Valaris to do some more Christmas shopping, and I say Elaine of all people because we almost never see her, like, in the wild. She's always just kind of hanging out at the house. Despite how busy Feyre claims to be, we never actually see her do anything productive during her chapters. Like, she constantly talks about working, but we never actually see her do any work. And I know that watching Feyre work would be kind of boring, but all of this Christmas shopping is also kind of boring. So it comes off like Feyre acts like she's way busier than she actually is and is just kind of out of touch. Feyre feels super guilty about being out shopping, which makes it even funnier that we never actually see her do any work, because it just really hammers home that it just seems like Feyre is putting on this performance of working, but she's, like, really not. Elaine tells Feyre that she knows it's hard for her to buy things she doesn't really need because of their years spent in poverty and they still have all that trauma, and the two have a really long, sappy conversation about all of that. Elaine justifies that buying presents isn't unnecessary because technically it's just honoring the fairy tradition and you need to buy them for solstice, which means it has a purpose and it's not useless, and that's good enough to convince Feyre that it's okay to spend some of her unfathomable wealth on some stupid bullshit for a group of rich assholes who already have anything they could ever want. Oh boy, Christmas, wow! They pass a shop and Feyre sees an interesting tapestry in the window. It's made of black fabric that is so dark that it's basically Vanta black. If you don't know what that is, I'll try to flash like an image on the screen or something. Basically, it's so black that it hardly reflects any light, and it's kind of weird to look at. It almost is like a visual glitch because it just has no depth to it. It's very odd. This tapestry has a contrasting silver thread that looks like woven starlight, according to Feyre, because she would know what that looks like. and it forms a badass design of a mountain, and that's like the whole Night Court thing is mountains. They love mountains and stars, like that's their whole deal, and Feyre is like, oh my god, this is bitchin', I need to get this rug. Feyre is like, I don't know who I'm giving this rug to, but I must have it. We then get an extremely long conversation between Feyre and the shopkeeper about the inspiration behind the rug and how she made it and yada yada yada. The story is that the shopkeeper's husband died in the war, so she essentially manifested her grief to make the best tapestry that has ever tapestried. And Feyre is super moved by this story because of course she is. And even though Rhysand also died during the war, he had the decency to come back to life, so, like, she understands what this woman's going through, except it's surface level because her husband didn't actually die. Like, whatever. Feyre is into this tapestry, she's into the trauma, she loves this shit. This overly long conversation gives Feyre an epiphany that she can continue to create art even through suffering, and she's so inspired that she buys the tapestry for herself, even though she's supposed to be out Christmas shopping for everyone else. Wow, love that for her. I really thought that she was gonna be buying this for Rhysand, but she keeps it for herself, which is just fucking hilarious. That's so funny. Feyre shops with Elaine for a little longer before going back to that abandoned art studio to paint out some more of her feelings. She's basically in an art frenzy as she whips out painting after painting to process all of her emotions, and she's just, like, really going through it. Feyre is interrupted when Racina, that fairy she met in the street a few chapters ago, comes into the abandoned studio with a mop to clean the place up. She's surprisingly chill about Feyre basically squatting there and trespassing instead of just buying the place. But I guess she can't really scold her high lady, now can she? Like, Feyre can kind of just carte blanche do whatever she feels like. Feyre awkwardly apologizes for missing the painting night that Racina invited her to because, like, Feyre was too chicken shit to go, and then she starts trying to gather her stuff to quickly leave. Racina assures Feyre that she can leave her supplies there and encourages her again to buy the studio, but Feyre still seems pretty unsure even though she's clearly been using the place. Like, Feyre, why don't you stimulate your own economy and buy this building? Like, why is this even a hesitation? Feyre runs out of the studio so fast that she smacks straight into Rhysand because of course he's just there now. Like, what the fuck? Rhysand, what are you doing here? Feyre and Rhysand have some banter, and Feyre admits that she's been using the abandoned building as her impromptu art studio, and Rhysand is like, dude, why don't we just buy this place? And I'm like, yes, why don't you just buy this place? Why? Why are we still doing this? Feyre is still being really weird about just buying the building, even though it really doesn't make any sense for her to act like this. I know she feels guilty about spending time on art, but buying the place would be a favor to the owners who could probably use the money. And even if Feyre didn't use it to paint, she could just buy it and let it sit there until she was ready to paint again. Like, there's no reason not to just buy it! Feyre tells Rhysand about her dreams to essentially do art therapy, because that's, like, something she's come up with now of, like, I love to paint to get out my feelings, so maybe other people can do that. And so she invents art therapy. And she wants to teach other people to paint, and Rhysand is so supportive about it. Because of course he is. Rhysand is like, follow your dreams, girl boss. If only there was a conveniently abandoned building for sale that could be used to host such a thing and we are being repeatedly begged to purchase it. Feyre seems unconvinced that her dreams will come true, even though there are literally no barriers to her achieving her dream, and luckily the scene ends there. We then cut to Feyre visiting Amren at her apartment, and, like, I don't give a shit about Amren. I don't even want to, I
hate it here.
Sorry guys, I'm tired. Let's just get into it. I took a seat across from her at the long dark wood table, examining the half-finished puzzle of what seemed to be some sort of autumnal pastoral. A new hobby of yours? Without that odious book to decipher, I found I missed such things. Another piece snapped into place. This is my 5th this week. We're only 3 days into the week. They don't make them hard enough for me. How many pieces is this one? 5,000. Show off. I don't know if I'm just dumb, but a 5,000-piece jigsaw puzzle seems very modern to me given this setting, and it's kind of immersion breaking. Like, is that just me? Did 5,000-piece puzzles exist in this time period? Whatever this time period is supposed to be? Also, it's pretty interesting that Feyre is super busy with all sorts of random shit while Amren is just sitting around doing puzzles all week. Like, I know Amren isn't all that helpful and probably doesn't even really want to help, but there's gotta be something she can do. If Feyre is so busy all the time and Mor has to go do things with other countries, then why can't Amren step up? What is Amren even doing? There really doesn't seem to be any plot reason to explain why Amren shouldn't have just stayed dead because she's not useful at all. So it makes her resurrection feel even more unnecessary than it already did. Amren should have stayed dead. They chat a little longer before Feyre gets to the point and says that she's there to talk about Nesta. If you don't remember from the last book, Aaron and Nesta spent a lot of time together doing their magic training stuff, and so they seem to get along, and Feyre figures that Amren might know some things about Nesta and give her some advice. Amren didn't reply for a while, scanning the pieces laid out instead. I was about to repeat myself when she said, "I like your sister. One of the few." Amren lifted her eyes to me, as if I'd said the words aloud. "I like her because so few do. I like her because she's not easy to be around, or to understand." But nothing, Amren said, returning to the puzzle. Because I like her, I am not inclined to gossip about her current state. For once, Amren is actually being respectful, and I wish she acted like this more often. This kind of calm wisdom is more fitting for her character, who is like 15,000 years old, rather than like her random bitchy remarks that feel very childish. Like, I would like Amren a whole lot more if she was like this all the time. They continue to talk, and Feyre is shocked to hear that Nesta actually visits Amren kind of frequently, but Amren still won't disclose any information about what she talks about with Nesta. And again, for once I actually like Amren. She's right not to tell Feyre about what Nesta told her in confidence. If Nesta wanted Feyre to know about that stuff, then she would have told Feyre herself. Amren tells Feyre that she needs to give Nesta some space, and Feyre immediately goes on the defense to say it's been months since all that trauma happened. And it's like, months? Girl, what? That's a crazy timeline to expect someone to be totally okay after witnessing a war. And Amren reminds Feyre that they're immortal now, so a few months is really nothing, because, like, Amren is 15,000 or something, and even Rhysand being 500, a few months is basically nothing at all. And even if you had a human lifespan, a few months is still a ridiculous time period to expect someone to be totally recovered from the horrors of a war they never signed up to witness. Feyre tries to pivot and is like, well, Elaine will be heartbroken if Nesta doesn't come to Christmas, and Amren calls her out and is like, hey, bestie, do you mean Elaine or do you mean yourself? And Feyre's like, well, shit, I guess it's both. And Amren basically says not to put Elaine in the middle of this conflict because Elaine has her own problems to worry about. And Feyre seems weirdly confused about what problems Elaine could possibly have to deal with, as if she didn't also just go through a lot since becoming a super hot fairy. I guess since Elaine isn't completely catatonic anymore, I guess Feyre just assumed she was fully healed and totally okay now and there's nothing to worry about anymore. Never mind the fact that Elaine has clearly expressed wanting to be human again and is, like, she is not okay either, she's just also pretending. Feyre asks Amren to talk to Nesta about coming to Christmas, and Amren is like, girl, no, it's not any of your business, and the chapter ends there. And it's like, oh my god, do I like Amren? Well, no, because this is kind of the only time she acts reasonable, but oh my god, Feyre is so dumb! The next chapter is from Rhysand's perspective as Cassian and Azriel bring their stuff into the townhouse to spend the night for Christmas. Why do they all have to stay at the same house? Who knows? That's just what they do. Cassian has brought a big bag of weapons with him, and Rhysand is like, dude, that's kind of weird. It's Christmas. Why do you need that stuff? Cassian toed off his boots and leaned against the headboard, folding his arms behind his head as his wings draped to the floor. The females bring their jewelry. I bring my weapons. I know a few females in this house who might take offense to that.
I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed.
Oh my god, I wouldn't say I'm offended. I'm just annoyed. Are we really doing this? Females, oh, they like jewelry and boys like weapons. Ooh, like, what are we doing? I could really do without these casual misogynist remarks from a supposed feminist who's allegedly fighting for women's rights in the shithole that is Illyria. Come on, like Cassian, really, dude, whose side are you on here? Like, are you with us or against us? Because you're making all this shit talk against women, and it's kind of pissing me off, dude. The Bat Boys banter about the sleeping arrangements and how cramped the house is, and they're like in these comically small beds, and it's so funny, except I'm just so annoyed it's not funny. Lucien has been relegated to staying in the attic if he shows up, as if he's incapable of walking or teleporting back to his own apartment that he has in Valaris after all the festivities of the night. Like, how drunk do they think everybody is gonna get that Lucien can't go back to his own apartment afterwards? Like, what? They're not driving vehicles. He can just walk home. Why? Also, Lucien probably isn't even gonna show up. Cassian wants to take bets on if Lucien will show up, and Azriel seems weirdly offended by that, like it's an insensitive thing to do, and like I'm confused why he's being all like moody about it. I think he's probably being awkward about Lucien because they're kind of in a love triangle situation with Elaine, but we don't get any commentary on that subject as like they abruptly start talking about Nesta instead. If you thought this Lucien, Asriel, Elaine thing is gonna go anywhere, I assure you it will not. Asriel randomly asks if Nesta is coming to Christmas, and nobody answers because nobody knows, even though Nesta said she wasn't going to come. Rhysand kind of changes the subject awkwardly and starts talking about business at the Illyrian camp, and we're reminded that there's stuff that they're not telling Cassian for seemingly no good reason other than it would make him sad before Christmas. Yeah, remember all the strife and turmoil and potential civil war in the Illyrian camps that's going on? Let's not tell Cassian because it will make him sad for Christmas. Like, God, I hate these people.
I hate the shit out of you!
If the Illyrians revolted, I didn't want to think that far down the road. What it would cost me. What it would cost Cassian. To fight the people he still so desperately wanted to be a part of. To kill them. It'd be far different from what we'd done to the Illyrians who'd gladly served Amarantha. And done such terrible things in her name. Far different. Is it really that different? Whether they agree with Amarantha or not, the Illyrians in general seem like a pretty shitty group of people, so like, yeah, get rid of them. I feel like if we were going to get a whole book about a war, I think a civil war between Illyria and the Night Court would have been a lot more interesting than the war with Hybern, just because I feel like it'd be so much more, like, dramatic and juicy and, like, really, I don't know, I just thought it would be a better idea. But it doesn't matter because this whole civil war thing goes nowhere and will be dropped at the end of this book, so whatever. The group banters some more about how tiny and cramped the room is and it's so funny and oh, these big beefy bat boys can't fit in this tiny room, haha, funny. And then the scene ends. Oh my god, I'm losing it. The next scene starts up by establishing that it's Christmas Eve and everyone, excluding Nesta and Lucien, is vibing around the fire, drinking some wine and chilling. Feyre is even more beautiful than usual because of course she is, and Rhysand openly ogles her to the point that Amren calls him out for it. I don't know if I've ever really mentioned it, but when the fairies get horny, they like literally emit pheromones and other people can smell it and it's kind of weird and awkward, so like, ew. They smell that Rhysand is horny and Amren is like, knock it off, dude, or I'm gonna put you in horny jail. But all of that is so rich coming from Amren, given how openly affectionate we've seen her be with her new boyfriend, Varian. And if you don't remember Varian, he's the Prince of Adriata in the Summer Court, whatever it means to be a prince in this random-ass fairy world. So Varian is there for Christmas, and he talks about how the Summer Court celebrates their solstice, and I didn't write down in my script what they do, so I don't remember what they do. But Feyre is like, oh, well, we should have invited Tarquin to this dinner. And like, God, I wish Tarquin was here. He's like the only character I like other than Lucien. Or not even like, they're the only ones I can tolerate. Feyre keeps looking at the clock anxiously, and it's clear that she's waiting for Nesta to show up, even though Nesta was like, I'm not coming. Rhysand telepathically reminds Feyre that she invited Nesta to the party tomorrow, and that she probably won't come to that Christmas Eve celebration because she wasn't technically invited to that one. The group makes some kind of sappy holiday toast, and the chapter ends there. The next chapter is from Feyre's perspective as she wakes up on Christmas morning, which I will remind you is also her birthday, because of course it is. There's a present already waiting for her next to her pillow, and Rhysand is very chipper despite how hungover Feyre is, because I guess they were like, drank all the wine in the damn house. Feyre opens the present, and it's a super fancy sketchbook, even though the only art we've seen Feyre do is painting, not drawing as far as I can remember, but she likes the sketchbook, so good for them. Rhysand also gives Feyre a fluffy scarf and a fancy set of pencils for her sketchbook, and these are just her birthday gifts, and he's like, oh, your Christmas gift will come later when everybody's here for Christmas, like, just you wait. Feyre cracks open her sketchbook to draw a nude portrait of Rhysand, and the scene mercifully ends before things get spicy, and I've said this before, but I promise I'm not actually a prude. The sex scenes in this series are just so cringy, and it doesn't help that I hate the characters involved, so I'm so not into it. Eventually Feyre and Rhysand venture out of their room, and the house is quiet, so everyone else must be turbo hungover and still asleep. We get a weird detail that Rhysand is wearing his Illyrian fighting leathers, which is very odd for Christmas, and then Asriel and Cassian also show up in full gear. They grab Rhysand and drag him out of the house without any further explanation, and Feyre is surprisingly nonchalant about all of that just happening. Feyre starts to think about buying that art studio again, but she doesn't want to stress herself out with business stuff on Christmas, so she puts that thought aside for now. Elaine comes out with a big tray of desserts and says that she's been up since dawn baking with the servants because that's like her thing now. Elaine asks Feyre if she's heard from Nesta, and there's coincidentally a knock on the door right at that moment, so they're like, oh, Nesta, she's here! Except of course it's not Nesta, like duh it's not Nesta, and the chapter ends as it's revealed that it's Lucien who's at the door. Lucien, hey buddy, I missed you, long time no see, too bad nobody else is going to be happy to see you. Feyre, Elaine, and Lucien sit around the fire to chat and catch up. He's brought presents, which I think is sweet considering nobody got anything for him, including Elaine. I don't think she got anything for him either. Lucien says that he's not staying for the celebration because he has other plans, and he's been spending a lot of time with Jurian and Vassa in the human territory to take care of some post-war business, so I guess he'll be going back there to spend Christmas with them. Except they don't celebrate Christmas, so I don't really know what Lucien is doing. Elaine leaves the room to get some refreshments, and Lucien takes the opportunity to ask Feyre how Elaine has been doing recently. He specifically asks if Elaine is still hung up on her fairy-hating ex-fiancé that she was like so devastated to lose. And Feyre is like, well, she still needs some more time to get over it. Lucien seems frustrated with that and says that Elaine's ex-fiancé is a big huge jerk, which I don't disagree with. I would agree with you on that, I admitted. But remember that they were engaged. Give her time to accept it. To accept a life shackled to me? My nostrils flared. That's not what I meant. She wants nothing to do with me. Would you, if your positions were reversed? He didn't answer. I feel bad for Lucien because he really is trying to be respectful, but he can't catch a break. He doesn't really have a court to belong to anymore, and even his mate, who the Cauldron specifically chose for him, wants nothing to do with him either. Nothing ever really goes well for Lucien, which sucks considering he's one of the few characters I don't utterly hate, and he just does not deserve all the shit he goes through. Like, oh my god, poor Lucien. Feyre says that Lucien should spend some time in Valaris after Christmas so he can spend time with Elaine, and Lucien points out that Elaine clearly doesn't want to do that, so like, why would he force her to? We then get a weird reminder from the narrative about Illyrian, the High Lord of the Day Court, and how he is actually Lucien's father, and clearly Lucien doesn't know that Illyrian is his father, and Feyre doesn't plan on telling him. Good lord, why are we getting into all of that now? And like, what the hell? Lucien really needs better friends than Feyre, that she's just like, yeah, I know something he doesn't know, and I'm just not gonna tell him. Like, I know Feyre doesn't think it's her place to tell him, but I would be freaking pissed if somebody knew that information and didn't tell me. Like, oh my god, poor Lucien. You could come live here, is all I'm saying, I pushed. Truly live here. Stay in Valaris for longer than a few days at a time. We could get you nicer quarters. Lucien got to his feet. I don't need your charity. I rose as well. But Jurian and Vassa's is fine? You'd be surprised to see how the three of us get along. Friends, I realized. They had somehow become his friends. So you'd rather stay with them? I'm not staying with them. The manor is ours. Interesting. His golden eye word. What is? Not feeling very festive at all, I said sharply. That you now feel more comfortable with humans than with the High Fae. If you ask me, I'm not. It seems like you've decided to fall in with two people without homes of their own as well. Lucien stared at me, long and hard. When he spoke, his voice was rough. Happy solstice to you, Feyre. What the hell, Feyre? Why would Lucien want to spend more time in Valaris when nobody wants him there? Elaine doesn't want anything to do with him, and Rhysand only kind of tolerates him and kind of actually hates him. Feyre chooses Rhysand and the Inner Circle over Lucien every time, so why does she expect him to hang out in Valaris as a third wheel instead of forging his own friendships? The way Feyre is so catty about Lucien making his own friends is so toxic and weird considering she doesn't ever give him any attention and nobody wants him there. Like, oh my god, Feyre just wants this man in her orbit but doesn't want to actually, like, do anything with him or help him or be his friend. Like, what?
Now, I'm really mad.
It's also so strange to me that Feyre calls Lucien out for being more comfortable with humans than High Fae, considering all of her motivational speeches about how Fae and humans should get along, and how her relationship with Rhysand is the bridging of their people because she used to be a human and he's a fairy, but now she's also a fairy, but like, whatever, fate, blah blah blah, fate in the cauldron, whoa. I'm just so confused because shouldn't Feyre be happy that Lucien is so comfortable with humans? Wasn't that the goal, to make the fairies more comfortable with humans? Why is it a problem that Lucien found two other outcasts to hang out with? Human or fairy or whatever. Like, why is it a problem that Lucien has friends? It sounds like he's doing productive work with Jurian and Vassa in the human realm, and somebody needs to work on that, so Feyre should be grateful for his efforts instead of being weirdly accusatory and she's acting so weird about this. Lucien goes to leave and Feyre stops him, and she doesn't apologize because why would she? But she says, oh, I didn't mean what I said, even though she doesn't apologize, and that, Lucien, you always have a home in Valaris. Girl, don't even pretend like you didn't mean what you said. If you didn't mean what you said, then say sorry. If you don't say sorry, then you meant it. Lucien studied the sitting room, the foyer beyond, and the dining room on its other side. The Band of Exiles. The what? That's what we call ourselves. The Band of Exiles. You have a name for yourselves? I fought my incredulous tone. He nodded. Oh my god, Feyre, you clearly meant what you said, and don't even sit here and act like Lucien is weird for naming his group when the Inner Circle also has a cringy group name and they call themselves the Court of Dreamers. The Court of Dreamers is way more cringe to me than the Band of Exiles, actually maybe they're equal. They're both cringe, but Feyre, you do not have a leg to stand on, girl, and don't be mean to Lucien. He didn't do anything.
Don't be fucking rude.
But I asked, and what exactly does this Band of Exiles plan to do? Host events? Organize party planning committees? Lucien's metal eye clicked faintly and narrowed. You can be as much of an asshole as that mate of yours, you know that? True. I sighed again. I'm sorry, I just...
You're such a bitch. What did you say? I have an itch.
Feyre, what the fuck? Didn't Lucien just say that they were taking care of post-war business? The Mortal Queens are still in hiding, so Jurian has taken on a lot of responsibility to, rebuild things down there. To accuse Lucien and the Band of Exiles of just being a party planning committee when all Feyre does is hand out coats and virtue signal at charity events is so hypocritical and it's so annoying! Feyre's work only benefits the people of Valaris, while Lucien and his Band of Exiles are actually trying to help humans, which Feyre claims to care about considering she was once human, and now she's acting weird about helping humans! I don't understand why Feyre is being such a humongous asshole about all of this. It's so weird. Feyre tries to apologize, but Lucien is quick to cut her off. I don't have anywhere else to go. Before I could object, he said, You ruined any chance I have of going back to Spring. Not to Tamlin, but to the court beyond his house. Everyone either still believes the lies you spun, or they believe me complicit in your deceit. And as for here, he shook off my grip and headed for the door. I can't stand to be in the same room as her for more than 2 minutes. I can't stand to be in this court and have your mate pay for the very clothes on my back. Lucien has a point. I wouldn't want to live in the night court either when nobody wants me around and there's all these strings attached and they want you to be so grateful to them but they don't give a fuck about you. That's so awkward. I wouldn't want to be there. Feyre still doesn't feel bad for anything that she did in the spring court, and she thinks to herself that she'll never feel guilty enough about it to apologize, which is so wild to me. I don't think that Tamlin deserves an apology, but all the innocent spring court citizens who got caught up in that mess definitely deserve an apology and some charity money or something. Feyre, oh my god! Lucien then says that Rhysand's visit to the spring court made things even worse because obviously, and Feyre gets defensive about that because obviously... And she's like, Rhysand didn't involve you in that, Lucien. He might as well have. Whatever he said or did, Tamlin decided he wishes to remain in solitude. His russet eye darkened. Your mate should have known better than to kick a downed male. I can't say I'm particularly sorry that he did. You will need Tamlin as an ally before the dust has settled. Tread carefully. I didn't want to think about it. Consider it today. Any day. My business with him is done. Yours might be, but Rhys's isn't, and you do well to remind your mate of that fact. Exactly! Feyre keeps acting like Tamlin is just some irrelevant ex from her past and not like he's a political leader, and now she is also a political leader, or the wife of a political leader, or whatever you want to call her. So she's gonna have to figure out how to get along with Tamlin. Even if Feyre steps back and lets Rhysand handle all the business with Tamlin, that's not any better because he also won't let go of this grudge. The Night Court is going to cause another war out of spite because they can't just leave Tamlin alone. And I'm not trying to be a Tamlin apologist, but the Night Court is making everything so much worse in this situation. Lucien tells Feyre which present he brought is for her and which one is for Elaine, and then he leaves empty-handed because of course nobody got anything for him. Merry Christmas, Lucien! What a great way to start Solstice. I'm glad to see that even fairies fight with each other on the holidays instead of just trying to get along for one day out of the year. Like, I guess they're just as human as the rest of us in that regard. Feyre goes to the kitchen to tell Elaine there's no need to make tea because Lucien is already gone now. I knew I wasn't truly angry with her, not angry with anyone but myself, but I said, "You couldn't say a single word to him? A pleasant greeting?" Elaine only stared at the steaming kettle as she set it on the stone counter. "He brought you a present." Those doe brown eyes turned toward me, sharper than I'd ever seen them. "And that entitles him to my time? My affections?" "No," I blinked, "but he is a good male." Despite our harsh words, despite this band of exiles bullshit, he cares for you. He doesn't know me. You don't give him the chance to even try to do so. Oh my god, can Feyre please just stay out of everyone else's love lives? In the last book, she talked about how Elaine and Asriel should have been mates, and now she's back on Lucien's side all of a sudden? It's none of Feyre's business about any of this, and she needs to butt out. As bad as I feel for Lucien, that still doesn't entitle him to Elaine, and he does recognize that. Elaine shouldn't be pressured into giving Lucien a chance if she genuinely doesn't want anything to do with him, and people need to stop forcing that, because even Lucien isn't. Elaine says that she doesn't want a mate, she wants a man, which clearly means that she hasn't accepted the whole being turned into a hot fairy thing yet, and she still wants to go back to her human life. Considering they're immortal now, Elaine can spend a few years getting used to her new fairy life, and then maybe she'll be open to giving Lucien a chance when she's actually accepted her new circumstances. Not everyone can move through trauma or relationships at a breakneck pace like Feyre. Feyre was 19 at the start of the series, and now she's 21. In that time span, she was engaged to one guy and then married another. Not to mention all of the war and the Amarantha stuff. Feyre literally died. She moves through this shit so fast and expects everyone else to do the same, and they're just not ready for it. That's fine if that timeline worked for Feyre, even though I would argue it hasn't, and she is just still not in a healed state, and she's just pretending she is. Anyway, Feyre needs to stop pushing other people to do things they are not ready for. Feyre kind of understands that she's being unreasonable, and she doesn't want to fight on Christmas, so she leaves Elaine alone and she goes and finds Mor so they can start day drinking. Mor was clearly eavesdropping on that conversation, and she straight up tells Feyre to leave Elaine and Lucien alone and let them figure out their own lives and everything that happened in the war. She just needs to let them figure it out and stop forcing things on them. Feyre seems receptive to the conversation, but I don't think she ever really gets any less nosy about other people's business, so I don't think she's actually listening and absorbing this kind of stuff. We then finally learn where Rhysand and the other Bat Boys went in their full combat armor on Christmas Day, as Mor teleports them to a snowy mountaintop. Feyre realizes they're at the cabin from the second book, where she formally accepted the mating bond with Rhysand, and ew, good lord, I hope the place has been disinfected since then, because they banged on every surface in that house. We then get a goofy scene that feels straight out of a fanfiction, as Rhysand and the Bat Boys have a snowball fight, complete with forts and everything. It's their Christmas tradition, and they've been doing it for the past 500 years. I want to like this scene because it's whimsical and fun, and oh, these old fairies are playing with snow and they're doing a snowball fight. Isn't that fun? But I really hate how the inner circle's immaturity repeatedly bites them in the ass and gets them in trouble because nobody will just talk to each other, or they're so childish all the time that now this childish scene is really annoying when you think about how old these people are. They're 500 and they still act like children. Maybe I'm just being really bitter because I hate these characters so much. This really would be a cute scene if you liked these characters, but I don't. The chapter ends as Feyre and Mor go into the cabin to hang out at the fireplace and drink some more wine, and god, I wish I was there right now. Not with them, just at a fireplace with some wine. The next chapter opens up with an announcement that Asriel won the snowball fight, which makes it his 199th victory. That means over the last 500 years, he's won almost 40% of the time, and I wonder what the breakdown for the rest of that 60% is between Rhysand and Cassian. Either way, Asriel is completely dominating both of them in this regard, so good for you, Asriel. You can't find a girlfriend, but you can throw a mean snowball. The Bat Boys continue their Christmas tradition by going out to a sauna that's attached to the cabin, and we never heard about this sauna before, but it does exist. And of course Feyre has dirty thoughts about 3 buff naked tattooed, because remember, they're covered in tattoos, I forget that frequently, but anyway, they're buff naked dudes getting all sweaty together, and Feyre is like, damn, that shit is hot. And I'm like, What am I doing right now? What am I reading? I am losing my mind. Rhysand picks up on Feyre's lust. Ew, remember, because he can read her mind or whatever. And so they have this flirtatious telepathic conversation about how much boning they did the last time they were at the cabin. Rhysand pops a boner, which is apparently rude to do in a shared sauna when you're naked with your bros, and Feyre hears his distant yelp as he's kicked out into the snow. What is even happening right now? I'm not saying that we can't get some lighthearted scenes, but it's starting to feel a little self-indulgent at this point, kind of like a fanfiction, if that makes any sense. No shade to fanfiction, it's just kind of indulgent in that way, like that's kind of the point, I think. This goofy Christmas novella really doesn't fit the tone or vibes of the rest of the series, because it's all about, like, war and death and, like, kind of dramatic shit. And I feel like SJM should have just wrote this for herself as her, like, little self-fanfiction and put it aside just for herself instead of publishing it, because it is just kind of odd. Anyway, the group go back to the townhouse in Valaris to celebrate Christmas, and everyone is dressed up super fancy, so of course we get long descriptions of everyone's outfits that I don't care to go through. Everyone banters a bit before Rhysand comes out with a birthday cake, complete with candles for Feyre to blow out, because remember, it's her birthday! The cake with the candles feels like a very modern tradition. I did not look up where this tradition came from or how long it's been around, but it doesn't seem like something a fairy would do. It feels very human. Like, I don't think the fairies would have candles on their birthday cake because of how fucking old they get. Like, you can't fit 500 candles on a cake, so I just don't think that's something they would do for birthdays. I know that's so nitpicky to point out, but little details like this really kill the world building of this supposedly being some whimsical fairy world. And it doesn't help that Feyre's cake is decorated like the cake boss himself made it. It was then that I realized what the 3 different tiers had been painted to look like. On the top, flowers. In the middle, flames. And on the bottom, whitest layer, stars. The same design of the chest of drawers I'd once painted in that dilapidated cottage. One for each of us, each sister. Those stars and moons sent to me. My mind by my mate, long before we'd ever met. And probably when I was a child. Oh, sorry. I asked Nuala to do it in that order, Elaine said as the others gathered round. Because you're the foundation, the one who lifts us. You always have been. I want to be happy for Feyre for getting the recognition she deserves, but ever since she came to the fairy realm, specifically the Night Court, she's gotten so insufferable that I don't even care anymore, and I don't think she deserves any credit for anything ever, because I'm just really a Feyre hater right now. I think I'm just so over this book that I hate everyone, and I don't want anything good for any of them. Except Lucien and Tarquin. They can have good things, but nobody else. The scene ends as Feyre blows out the candles and makes a wish, and I don't remember what her wish is, and I don't care.
Let me pretend I care. Okay, I'm done.
The next scene is everyone exchanging presents, and there's a comical amount of gifts, despite these rich-ass people having everything they could already want, but I've already complained about that ad nauseum. Nobody seemed all that enthused when it came to shopping, and they were all kind of dragging their feet on it, so where did all this shit even come from? Did everybody just buy a bunch of bullshit so they'd have stuff to open? Like, what is happening? So they start exchanging gifts, and then we get this baffling exchange. Cassian elbowed his way past Amryn, earning a hiss of warning, and began chucking presents. Moore caught hers easily, shredding the paper with as much enthusiasm as Amryn. She grinned at the general. "Thank you, darling." Cassian smirked. "I know what you like." Moore held up. I choked. Asriel did too, whirling on Cassian as he did. Cassian only winked at him as the barely there red negligee swayed between Moore's hands. Oh hell no! Oh hell no! Before you get too mad at Cassian though, Moore is quick to clarify that she specifically asked for lingerie, so it's actually her you should be mad at and not Cassian because he was just following orders. Why the fuck would Moore ask Cassian of all people for a sexy nightgown? Given their past kind of one-night stand and now Cassian's budding relationship with Nesta, that seems really inappropriate and outright weird to ask him for a gift that has any sexual connotation whatsoever. Reminder that Moore is not interested in dudes. Well, I mean, she is sexually interested in dudes, but she's not sexually interested in Cassian, so I have no idea why SJM went out of her way to make things weird again, and there's no reason to make things weird. Just don't make it weird! The chapter dramatically ends with a knock on the door, and they assume it's from Nesta, and the vibes are instantly ruined by her arrival, even though Feyre begged her to be there. So Nesta joins the party, and the mood is pretty tense, even though everybody is trying to act normal, which kind of makes it worse, actually. Even Elaine is kind of acting fake and takes Nesta straight to the liquor cabinet, even though I thought they all knew she has an alcohol problem, so that's like a really weird thing for Elaine to do. And we've never known Elaine to be a drinker before now. Don't take her to the wine, take her to the food, Amren called to Elaine from her perch on the armchair as she slid the pearl earrings Az had given her into her lobes. I can see her bony ass even through that dress. Nesta halted halfway across the room, spine stiff. Cassian went still as death. Elaine paused beside our sister, that plastered-on smile faltering. Amren just smirked at Nesta. Happy solstice, girl. Nesta stared at Amren, until a ghost of a smile curved her lips. Pretty earrings. I feel like Amren and Nesta get along because Amren is the only one who doesn't walk on eggshells around her and makes it weird. Yeah, Amren is very rude and bitchy to Nesta, but Amren is very rude and bitchy to everyone, so it doesn't come off like she's treating Nesta any differently like the others are. The vibes are a little better now, but Feyre quickly realizes that nobody got any presents for Nesta, and so now it's weird again. Except Nesta didn't bring any presents for anyone else though, so I think it's fine, and it's not like Nesta is used to celebrating Christmas because it is a fairy holiday, so I think she's good without getting any gifts. Nesta wishes Feyre a happy birthday before the group goes back to exchanging gifts. Elaine did actually get something for Nesta, and it's a box set of romance novels, which feels kind of meta and also very modern. Like, would they really be selling box sets at this time? I don't know. It's weird. Moore gives Azriel his gift, and even though it's just some towels, he gets all blushy and kind of intense about it. It's like, ew, Azriel is weird. This attitude is so cringe to me. He's down bad for anyone who gives him even a little attention, which, again, it's just cringe.
Weird, buddy. You're weird.
And I really think that Moore needs to bite the bullet and turn him down once and for all. She doesn't owe him anything, and his attention to her is very weird, but it's also weird to let him keep hoping that something will happen when it clearly never will. All of these people are just so cringe and embarrassing, and I'm over it. Are we done with this book yet? Are we done with this video yet? Anyway, Moore then gives Cassian his gift, and if I wasn't done with the video before, I am done with the video now, because what is happening? Cassian at last turned to Moore, tearing open her present with a disregard for the fine wrapping. He laughed at whatever was inside the box. Just what I always wanted. He held up a pair of what seemed to be red silk undershorts. The perfect match to her negligee.
I just can't do it. I can't take this shit no more, man.
Excuse me, what the fuck? What the fuck do you mean? Moore specifically asked for Cassian to give her a nightgown only so that she could give him a matching set of boxers? I can't even begin to articulate how weird that is. Why did she do this? Why did she plan this? And did she know Nesta was gonna witness this? What? Even if Cassian wasn't starting to get feelings for Nesta, it is still weird for Moore to continue to flirt with him. I love that the only queer woman in this series is still such a massive pygmy when it comes to men. That's not infuriating at all. What? Why? Why?
It's okay. I'm not mad.
Really?
Nope. I'm furious!
God damn, I gotta take a chill pill, or I will never make it through this video with my sanity. Oh, no, I lost my sanity a long time ago. I guess we just gotta keep it pushing then. I don't care to run through exactly what presents everyone got, but I will say that Feyre gave out some paintings, and that's hilarious if you consider the headcanon that she's a terrible artist. The narrative implies that Feyre is really good, but it's more fun to imagine that she isn't and everyone is just pretending that she is to gas her up. Feyre then gives Rhysand an extra special painting. For on that painting, I'd shown him what I had not revealed to anyone, what the Ouroboros had revealed to me, the creature inside myself. The creature full of hate and regret and love and sacrifice. The creature that could be cruel and brave, sorrowful and joyous. I gave him me, as no one but him would ever see me. No one but him would ever understand. Except SJM didn't know how to describe any of that, so she didn't, and that's all the detail we get about that, and I have no idea what the painting looks like at all. And if you don't remember, the Ouroboros is the magic mirror from the last book that drives people crazy when they look into it because they can't face themselves except Feyre, because of course, Feyre didn't go crazy even though everyone else has. I still think it's a major cop-out that SJM glossed over all of those scenes, so we didn't actually get to see Feyre confront herself and her flaws, and it's also vague. But Feyre isn't going to get any more self-aware anytime soon, so let's just keep it pushing. Let's move on. Elaine gives Azriel some gamer sups, a drink powder that cures headaches, and this overly long gift exchanging scene finally mercifully ends. We get a little time skip through dinner and the night is winding down. Feyre walks Nesta to the door and gives her the promised bribe for coming to the party. Here. Nesta half turned toward me, focus darting to what was in my hand. The small slip of paper. The banker's note for her rent, and then some. As promised, I said. For a moment, I prayed she wouldn't take it, that she would tell me to tear it up. But Nesta's lips only tightened, her fingers unwavering as she took the money. Why would Nesta tell Feyre to rip up the check? Where is she supposed to magically get rent money on such short notice with no job? Of course she was going to take the money. Why would she turn it down out of the goodness of her heart? Feyre, come on. If Feyre is uncomfortable financially supporting Nesta, then she needs to woman up and say something about it instead of expecting Nesta to just, gain some integrity. The chapter ends with Cassian storming out after Nesta because apparently he's had enough of her attitude, and the next chapter is from his perspective, which is unbearable. Good God, I hate Cassian. Cassian is fed up with Nesta's attitude, but he doesn't really know how to fuck. What the fuck?
Okay. Let's try this again.
Cassian is fed up with Nesta's attitude, but he really doesn't know how to confront her about it, so he just lamely offers to walk her home. Nesta turns him down, which frustrates him even more. And you didn't say one goddamned word to me the entire night. Not that he'd said a word to her. She'd made it clear enough in those initial days after that last battle that she wanted nothing to do with him. With any of them. He understood, he really did. It had taken him months, years after his first battles to readjust, to cope. Hell, he was still reeling from what had happened in that final battle with Hybern too. Cassian says that he understands what Nesta is going through, but it doesn't really seem like it. It doesn't really seem like anybody is acknowledging what Nesta's going through, even though they constantly say they are. Everyone seems to forget that Nesta isn't a warrior and never had any intention of becoming one, so she was especially traumatized by being in a war zone because she has never seen combat like that. Cassian talks with Nesta anyway, even though she repeatedly tells him to go back home and leave her alone. He then tries to give her a Christmas gift, even though she says she doesn't want it because she doesn't celebrate Christmas. Remember, that's not a thing in the human realm. Don't you just love a man who knows how to respect boundaries and listen to you when you tell him to fuck off? I hate Cassian! Nesta insists that she doesn't want anything from Cassian, and he can't help but think about the time she shielded him with her own body to protect him from the King of Hybern and that war and how, different things are now. He hadn't seen a glimpse of that person in months, had not seen her smile or laugh. He knew about the drinking, about the males. He told himself he didn't care. He told himself he didn't want to know who the bastard was who had taken her maidenhead. Told himself he didn't want to know if the males meant anything, if he meant anything. He didn't know why the hell he cared. Why he'd bothered, even from the start, even after she'd kneed him in the balls that one afternoon at her father's house. Bro, what? Her maidenhead? Does that mean what I think it means? This dude is 500 years old acting insecure about Nesta's virginity? For real? At least that's what I'm assuming maidenhead means, and it's not some generic fantasy term for something else. What? I don't even know. What? Also, I don't remember the scene that they're referring to about Nesta kneeing Cassian in the balls, but I wish I did because that sounds awesome and that's the only scene I want to read from now on. Cassian clenched his jaw and didn't bother to restrain himself when he said, "I'm tired of playing these bullshit games." She kept her chin high, the portrait of queenly arrogance. I'm not. Well, everyone else is. Perhaps you can find it in yourself to try a little harder this year. Those striking eyes slid toward him, and it was an effort to stand his ground. Try? I know that's a foreign word to you. Damn, Cassian did kind of get her with that one, though. There are situations where Nesta definitely should try harder, especially back in the day when she should have been supporting Feyre when they were all starving, but that's the past. Regardless, I do think Nesta should try a little bit harder, but I don't really like that everybody in the fairy realm wants to dictate what she does. If Nesta doesn't want to try to be nice, then she doesn't have to. She's an adult, and that's her right. The other adults in this situation need to establish boundaries with her about what they're willing to put up with. If they don't want to be around Nesta because she's rude and terrible, then they should just stop seeing Nesta. Like, it sucks that sometimes you have to cut people out, but that's just life. That's what you have to do. If Nesta won't at least try to play nice, then Feyre shouldn't keep enabling her to be a freeloading alcoholic by paying her rent. You gotta cut her off and sink or swim, girl. It's your time to fly. Nesta angrily says that she shouldn't have to try because she was dragged into the fairy realm in this whole situation against her will, and it's like, you do still have to try though, because what's the alternative? Like, come on, girl. It sucks, but that's really not an excuse. Cassian tells her that she should go somewhere else then if she hates the fairy realm so much, and then when Nesta agrees with that, he backtracks and is like, well, at least you should come back and live at the house with us instead of your crappy apartment. Yeah, because that's what Nesta wants, to be surrounded by the people that hate her and she hates them. Like, that'll make things better. I'm really not excited for the next book because I really can't deal with either of these people or any of these people. Oh my god, like, Cassian and Nesta are worse than Lucien and Feyre. They have to be. Like, ugh. Nesta and Cassian are both so reactive and aggressive that them being a couple is a recipe for disaster. Like, it's nightmare mode. Also, I know I just said that Nesta shouldn't have to try because she's an adult and can make her own choices, but I meant that in regards to things outside of basic survival. Whether she wants to be in the fairy realm or not, that's where she is now, and she needs to find some way to adjust to it. What's the alternative? Laying down and dying in a gutter? Drinking yourself silly in a tavern and fucking all the random fairies you can find? Stop following me. Stop trying to haul me into your happy little circle. Stop doing all of it. He knew a wounded animal when he saw one, knew the teeth they could bear, the viciousness they displayed. But it couldn't keep him from saying, your sisters love you. I can't for the life of me understand why, but they do. If you can't be bothered to try for my happy little circle's sake, then at least try for them. A void seemed to enter those eyes, an endless, depthless void. She only said, go home, Cassian. I mean, I don't understand why her sisters, especially Feyre, love Nesta either after how heinous she was in the first book, but like, that's just not something you say to someone. Especially someone who is clearly having a mental health crisis. I really don't like the insinuation that Cassian is kind of saying, like, at least just pretend to be okay because it makes everyone uncomfortable to be around you when you act like this. Like, I know there's some level of masking and being a person, but I really don't like that he's kind of asking her to kind of not be authentic with how she feels. Nesta just keeps telling Cassian to go home and she storms off. Cassian tries to stop her, but she just pulls her hand away and sneers at him like he's dirt on her shoe. This is shocking to him for some reason, as if she doesn't like do things like that all the time, so he lets her go and then throws her present into the river out of anger, which definitely is not a red flag at all. Like, I understand that Nesta is impossible to deal with, but destroying property is never a good response, and it always freaks me out that people do that when they get angry. That's just not healthy at all. Except if you're in a rage room. Go to a rage room and smash your shit, but don't break your own property. That is not good. Oh, and I don't think we ever learned what the present was that is now in the bottom of the river, and I don't care to fact check that, so, it's in the river now, whatever it is. We then cut to Nesta's POV as she returns to her shitty apartment, and she pulls out the check that Feyre gave her. She tried and failed to muster the shame, but nothing came. Nothing at all. There was anger occasionally. Sharp, hot anger that sliced her. But most of the time it was silence. Ringing, droning silence. She hadn't felt anything in months. Had days when she didn't really know where she was or what she'd done. They passed swiftly and yet dripped by. So did the months. She'd blinked and winter had fallen. Blinked and her body had turned too thin, as hollow as she felt. That's pretty clear dissociation from trauma, and what she really needs is a therapist instead of everyone barking at her about what she should or shouldn't do. Too bad therapists don't seem to exist in the fairy world because all of these characters need one. Nesta doesn't even want to light her fireplace because the crackling of the wood sounds like bones breaking, which reminds her of her father's neck being snapped, which is like a very clear trauma flashback. Nesta is obviously suffering and needs actual help instead of everyone just insisting that she pretends to be normal and gets over it, and of course she's not going to get that help. The next chapter cuts back to Feyre as the party is still winding down for the night. She goes up to her room with Lucien to start undressing, but he's like, no, wait, keep your clothes on. And then they teleport to the cabin for privacy and sit down by the fire, and it's all sexy and bleh. There was a throwaway line in a previous book about how Rhysand picks out all of Feyre's fancy dresses and he has awesome taste in women's clothing for some inexplicable reason. Except we get an explanation for that now as Rhysand reveals that his mother made all of the dresses back before Tamlin's family murked her. She made a bunch of dresses for Rhysand's future bride even though she had no idea if Rhysand was ever going to get married. And I guess Feyre is lucky that she had good taste and isn't being forced to wear a bunch of ugly gowns, and also these gowns are somehow tailored perfectly for Feyre. I guess Rhysand's mom is psychic or something, I don't know. Feyre then says that she wants her arm tattoos changed, and I also forget that Feyre has tattoos all the time. But the reason why she wants her tattoo to be changed is because Rhysand put an eye on her palm so that he could spy on her, and now he doesn't have to do that because they're like telepathically linked or whatever. This was all established in the first book if you don't remember. I don't even remember the first book anymore myself, truly. I'm a little confused by this part though, because I thought Feyre lost her tattoo when the King of Hybern broke their bargain, but then she did end up getting a tattoo on her other arm when she became High Lady. Was that new tattoo like a direct copy of the old tattoo and still had like the eye on the palm? Or does she somehow still have both tattoos? Like, I'm really confused. It seems like the narrative is acting like Feyre does still have both tattoos, and I really am confused by this part because I thought this eye part should be gone. Please correct me in the comments below if you know what is happening with these tattoos, because I definitely am missing something. Anyway, Feyre wants to replace the eyes on her palms with the Night Court insignia of the mountains with the 3 stars, and Rhysand acts like this is such a super big deal and like it's such a big commitment, as if they aren't already married and mates? Like, how is this a big commitment? Feyre says she has another Christmas gift for Rhysand and beams some kind of memory or thought or whatever into his head that isn't described to the reader just yet. He's all teary-eyed and asks if Feyre is sure about whatever she just told him telepathically, and she's like, yes, I am sure. So Rhysand changes her tattoo as requested, and the two get right down to business, and it's immediately clear that what Feyre said that she wanted is a baby. Oh my god!
My disappointment is immeasurable. And my day is ruined.
I've heard enough spoilers about this series coming in to know that this was going to happen, but I really wish that Feyre had stuck with wanting to wait, as she said previously. She's only 21, and now that she's immortal, there really shouldn't be a rush because she has all the time in the world, even if it does take the Fae a long time to conceive. I feel like she's letting her war trauma push her into having kids before she's actually ready, but the narrative isn't self-aware about that at all, and all of a sudden Feyre is just, like, ready for a baby. No issue. We then get a super long spicy scene as Feyre and Rhysand proceed to make said baby, and this scene is way dirtier than the sex scenes usually are, and we get this incredibly bizarre and uncomfortable detail. And when my mind could form words, when I could again feel his essence around me, his body still moving in my own, I sent him that image one last time, into the dark and stars, my gift. Perhaps our gift one day. Rhys spilled into me with a roar, his wings splaying wide. So what Feyre just did was mentally send Rhysand an image of the Bone Carver, who, if you do not remember, had previously shapeshifted to show Feyre what her future child with Rhysand would look like. Like, anyone who looks at the Bone Carver sees a different person, and when Feyre looked at him, she saw a little boy, and it turns out that little boy is her future son with Rhysand, and so she sent that image to Rhysand while they're boning! Ew! Yikes! I think this was meant to be a breeding kink thing, which, oh my god, why am I saying these words out loud right now? And this is not like a kid diddling thing, but climaxing to the image of a child, regardless of context, is very uncomfortable to me. Like, ooh, ew! That's really all I care to say about that whole mess, because what is there left to say, really? These two nasties bask in the afterglow for a little bit, and then the scene ends with them going in for round 2, and thank God they went to the cabin so that they didn't have to subject everyone in the townhouse to all their roaring and screaming. The roaring during climax will never not be funny to me because, like, what the fuck? Just what the fuck? The next scene picks up the following morning as Rhysand takes Feyre to the riverfront in Valaris with all those fancy abandoned houses that they had, like, seen earlier when Rhysand walked with Mor. Rhysand points out that he never gave Feyre her Christmas present, which I had totally missed, and points to one of the wrecked houses. Consider it a solstice and birthday present in one. He gestured to the house, the gardens, the grounds that flowed to the river's edge. With a perfect view of the rainbow at night, thanks to the land's curve. It's yours. Ours. I purchased it on Solstice Eve. Workers are coming in 2 days to begin clearing the rubble and knock down the rest of the house. I blinked again, long and slow. You bought me an estate? In that previous scene where they were walking down and looking at these houses, I didn't realize that they were in ruins, or maybe he just bought the only ruined one, whatever. Regardless, they now have a fourth house to live in sometimes. Remember, there's that fancy palace from ACOFAS that we haven't seen in a while, and I think that's on top of the mountain where the Court of Nightmares is. We don't go there that often. There's the House of Wind, which is like their fancy meeting house in the city. There's the Valaris townhouse that they apparently all cram in and live in together, and now there's this estate. You know, everybody needs 4 properties to rotate living in. Like, duh! Rhysand justifies this egregious overconsumption by saying that the townhouse is too small for everybody, and nobody really likes being at the House of Wind, so naturally they needed this 4th house. Like, of course they just needed it. He says that they can rebuild the fancy estate however Feyre wants, instead of putting that energy towards rebuilding other parts of the city or fixing up the slums. I love that for them. God, it must be nice to be rich. The chapter ends there, and the next chapter picks up from Rhysand's POV. He starts off with talking about how much he enjoyed banging Feyre, because that's really all he thinks about, and then he knocks on the door of the Spring Court Manor. Yup, he's back yet again to torment Tamlin for some inexplicable reason. Probably reeking of sex from his previous encounter with Feyre, so he's just here to rub it in Tamlin's face, I think. Nobody answers the door, so Rhysand just walks in and finds Tamlin in the kitchen staring at an elk that he just hunted for his dinner, and it's all bloody and kind of nasty, and it's kind of like a horror movie almost. Tamlin doesn't acknowledge Rhysand's presence at all, and I wouldn't either. Who the fuck is this guy just marching in here? Why is Rhysand even here in the first place? Rhysand thinks about what Lucien said to him about kicking someone while they're down, so I guess he went to check on Tamlin out of the goodness of his heart, or at least that's what the narrative is trying to claim. I don't really understand how this doesn't also qualify as kicking someone when they're down, because Rhysand is not being very helpful or kind, or let's just see how the scene plays out and you can see how dumb it is for yourself. Rhysand tells Tamlin that he had talked to the Summer Court and that they'll send troops to defend the border to the human realm since Tamlin doesn't have his own troops anymore, and it's kind of important that they protect it somehow. So I guess that's why Rhysand showed up, so that he could deliver that news to Tamlin, but he probably should have just had Tarquin, who is the High Lord of the Summer Court and who would be the one actually loaning the troops. He should have went and spoke to Tamlin about all of this. This all really comes off like Rhysand is pulling strings from the sidelines and is a puppet master, and that is not good for his image. He should have let Tarquin handle this. Rhysand asks Tamlin if that's okay with him, even though it doesn't matter if it's okay with him, that's just what's gonna happen. And Tamlin has not said anything this whole time or acknowledged Rhysand at all, and he ignores that question too. Slowly, Tamlin's head lifted, his unbound golden hair dull and matted. "Do you think she will forgive me?" The question was a rasp, as if he'd been screaming. I know whom he met, and I didn't know. I didn't know if her wishing him happiness was the same as forgiveness. If Feyre would ever want to offer that to him. Forgiveness could be a gift to both, but what he'd done... Do you want her to? His green eyes were empty. Do I deserve it? No. Never. Bro, can we just leave Tamlin alone already and stop rehashing all this shit? Feyre already got her revenge on Tamlin by utterly destroying the Spring Court, and at this point I don't care whether or not she forgives him. She's married and potentially has a baby on the way with another dude. Why are we still talking about Tamlin and Feyre's relationship? That's long gone. I think Feyre got even with Tamlin and they should just call a truce and move on. They don't need to be friends or anything, but at the very least they need to leave Tamlin alone and stop heckling him. It's the Night Court that is constantly bringing up the past for some reason. Just move on. You're supposed to be happy now, together. Why are you keep bringing up Tamlin? Tamlin goes on to ask Rhysand if he forgives him for killing Rhysand's mother and sister, or his father killing them. I don't know if Tamlin was actually involved with the killing. But anyway, Rhysand says well, I never heard an apology, so no. But it's not like an apology would even matter at that point, and Tamlin even says as much, because clearly how do you apologize for something like that? That whole situation is just so weird, and I feel is not fully fleshed out, and whatever. Rhysand seems to finally understand that he needs to be cordial with Tamlin for political reasons, and that's why he justifies his visit for showing up there that day, not to torment him. He's like, no, we gotta be friends now. Even though I'm sure Tamlin can clearly smell, the mating and stuff on him, and I really think that he is just going to rub this in his face. But Rhysand does a good deed by magically butchering the elk for Tamlin, and he fries it up for him so he can eat, and then the chapter ends there. We've never seen Rhysand cook before now, and here he is making some meat for Tamlin. Good for them. They're bros now, I guess. The next chapter is randomly from Morgan's perspective, even though she's hardly been in this book at all, and is generally one of the least important characters in the main cast, or like at least in the inner circle. Morgan really doesn't do much. Apparently Mor told Feyre that she was going to go to the Winter Court to visit her friend, but that's technically a lie because she stopped somewhere else first. So much for Mor's truth powers, whatever that means. We've never got any clarification on what her power is or how it works. This chapter is extremely bizarre and out of place and must be setting something up for a future plotline, or why else would this be included? Maybe I'm having too much hope for SJM's planning skills. But anyway, in this scene, Mor rides a horse to her secret mansion. Yup, Mor has a horse and a secret mansion. Has she ever mentioned liking horses before now? Nope. Who takes care of the horses at her secret mansion while she's away? Who knows? Why does she even have a secret mansion? Who cares?
Whoa! That's interesting, but I sure don't care.
Mor has a vaguely weird encounter in the woods, like some kind of ancient powerful force is watching her, but she doesn't actually see anything, and this plot point, of course, is not resolved in this book. That's why I said that this chapter must be a setup for a next book or a future plot point or something, because otherwise it feels very pointless and strange. I mean, there's a lot of scenes in this series that are pointless and strange, but this one was exceptionally meaningless and raises a bunch of questions that didn't need to be asked. We're back with Feyre in the next chapter as she visits the abandoned art studio that is no longer abandoned and has been all cleaned up and, is pretty now. We learn that the family of the previous owner just gave it to Feyre, which is kind of annoying considering she has more than enough money to properly purchase it from them, and was offered to buy it multiple times, and I guess they just gave up asking for money and just gave it to her, for real? Oh, but no, don't get it twisted. Feyre says that she did try to buy it from them, but they just gave it to her because she's so special or whatever. Paulina's sister, though, I said, my voice shaking as I pocketed the key in my overcoat, suggested I use the money for something else, that if I wanted to give it away, I should donate it to the Brush and Chisel. Do you know what that is? I'd been too stunned to ask, to do anything other than nod and say I would. Racina's ochre eyes softened. It's a charity for artists in need of financial help, to provide them and their families with money for food or rent or clothes, so they needn't go hungry or want for anything while they create. How the fuck has Feyre been so heavily involved in charity this whole time and she doesn't know about this artist charity? Are there really that many charity organizations in Velaris that Feyre can't keep track of them all? Why does such a wealthy city even need so many charities? This is so stupid it makes my brain hurt. I'm so over all of this performative charity nonsense. Shut up! Feyre is moved to tears by the concept of artists being supported and valued and feels inspired to open her own studio in her newly acquired fancy building, so good for her, I guess. The next chapter is from Rhysand's POV, and he's at the Illyrian camp watching some girls train. Yes, they use the word girl instead of female, which is somehow worse. If you're gonna call them females, always call them females. Don't just randomly slip the word girl in there, that kind of feels more patronizing. Apparently Rhysand and Azriel finally told Cassian about all the Illyrian political turmoil that they've randomly kept a secret from him. There's some more exposition around all of that with some kind of rival Illyrian clan that was never mentioned before now, so I don't care to explain any of that mess. Moving on to the next chapter, we are back with Feyre after a month time skip as she opens up her new studio to the public. Feyre and her artist friend Racina stand around anxiously waiting for people to show up to their grand opening, and then finally a group of kids show up. We learn that Feyre opened her studio to give art therapy to kids who experienced trauma from the war, even though the actual war didn't happen anywhere near the Night Court and the majority of Velaris' citizens did not join the army. Sure, there was that attack on Velaris all the way back in the second book, but that feels like ancient history by now. That's not to say that you can't benefit from art therapy or therapy in general if you haven't been through some kind of major trauma. I think everyone can benefit from therapy in some way. But it feels so weird to connect this art therapy so directly to the war when the war should have hardly had an effect on Velaris. It all just feels like more virtue signaling from Feyre when there are definitely other places in the Night Court, like Illyria and Prythian as a whole, that needs way more support than Velaris in regards to the war. But I've complained about that extensively, and I want this godforsaken video to be over, so let's move on. The next chapter is still from Feyre's POV as Rhysand shows up to the studio to see how the grand opening is going, and they look at a painting that one of the kids made. It was hard to look at, the two figures in it, the red paint, the figures in the sky, their vicious teeth and reaching claws. They don't take their paintings home? These will dry first, but I asked her if she wanted me to keep this somewhere special. She said to throw it away. Reese's eyes danced with worry. I said quietly, I want to keep it, to put it in my future office, so we don't forget. Maybe I'm being sensitive, but I think it's incredibly disrespectful of Feyre to keep this painting that the creator said they wanted it to be thrown away. Especially since this painting was created in a therapeutic context and not like art for art's sake. This painting was created by a child to work out their emotions, and if she wants it to be thrown away, it should be thrown away. I don't think that it's right for Feyre to display someone else's trauma in her home and use it as motivation. She has all sorts of her own trauma that she can remember and use it to like find strength in, instead of using some nameless kid's experience. It's just so odd to me. It really feels like crossing a boundary to keep this like art therapy painting after it was requested to be thrown away. Feyre and Rhysand look at another painting, and it's about a kid being disappointed that he didn't get a puppy for Christmas, which, what the fuck? That is so weird given the horrific painting we just saw. And again, you don't have to have major trauma to be in therapy, but it feels really silly to go from like war trauma to like, oh, I'm sad I didn't get a puppy. Like, what? It's weird to me how much Feyre acknowledges that Velaris and its citizens need to heal from the war, while she shows very little sympathy or understanding to Nesta, who was actually at the war and straight up beheaded the King of Hybern. Oh, and also was prepared to die for Cassian and watched her father get his neck snapped. Like, maybe Nesta needs some art therapy, or regular therapy, or anything else but being nagged at. Don't get me wrong, Nesta isn't doing herself any favors by acting the way she does and would probably refuse any help offered to her, but I don't like how everyone just wants her to pretend to be normal, despite how clearly she's suffering. It is just really bizarre to me that now we're supposed to view Feyre as like this art therapist, but she is so rude to Nesta and can't see her issues at all. It's just so weird. Anyway, Feyre and Rhysand stroll through Velaris and have a sappy conversation about how happy they are together and how they can rebuild after the war and yada yada yada, good times. They're both straight up crying, sobbing, pissing their pants, throwing up. No, sorry, that's just me, hold on. They're both straight up crying in each other's arms in public, which I have to imagine is awkward for anyone passing by to see their rulers like snot dripping down their face crying. But that's it. That's the end of this bizarre Christmas special novella and the end of our suffering. Oh my god. Thank God. Now all we have to do is get through this conclusion and we can be done with this freaking mess.
It's done. It's over now.
In conclusion, I can see why this book is the most polarizing one in the series. Upon my first reading, I was ready to call this my favorite ACOTAR book because it was so mercifully short and it didn't even try to pretend to have a plot. This book is mostly just vibes, and ACOTAR's best quality is the vibes. Apparently, that's what people like it for. But upon second reading and analysis, this book is maybe my least favorite. I'm not really sure. It's kind of hard to pick a least favorite of the bunch. This lighthearted, silly little Christmas novella was, I think, meant to wrap up Rhysand and Feyre's story because the next book is about Nesta and Cassian, but this didn't really feel like a wrap-up at all. I feel like it created more dangling plot points and didn't really resolve anything. There's the whole stuff with the potential Illyrian civil war. The Eris deal never went anywhere. There's that random scene at the end with Mor in her secret mansion. Like, why are we creating all of these new things? For a wrap-up book, this just didn't really seem like a wrap-up. I really wanted to like the fluffy, lighthearted Christmas scenes, but it's kind of hard to enjoy them when it is interspersed with Tamlin utterly suffering. I don't even like Tamlin, but they really just like mess with him for no reason, and he was really depressed. Like, so depressed that it really killed the Christmas vibe for me, and I really wish they had left the Tamlin parts out of this book or kept it to one scene instead of repeatedly going back to harass him. It just really makes the tone of this Christmas special kind of odd. When you want to enjoy Christmas, you don't want to see Tamlin super depressed. And why is Feyre even thinking about her ex during Christmas? She should be happy with her new man and her potential new baby. The baby thing is its own issue, and I really hate when romance ends with the couple having a baby because that's not how a relationship has to be. You don't have to have children to be in a valid relationship, and if that's what you want, that's fine, but Feyre said that she wanted to wait, and she didn't wait at all. I have so many more complaints about this book, and you can tell by the however many hours long this video is that, yeah, I do have a lot of complaints, and I think I've said anything that needs to be said already. My brain is mush and my spirit is broken, so let's just end the video now and stay tuned for the Silver Flames video. That'll be coming up as soon as I can get it together. At the time of posting this video, I am currently recovering from an abdominal surgery, so hopefully I can get to work on that video soon or while in recovery, and I'm not too loopy from pain meds to work on my script. Thank you all for watching, and if you made it this long into the video, again, thank you so much. You are the real MVP. I cannot believe so many people come here to listen to me rant about these dumbass fairies. Truly, this is delightful. I do actually like making these videos, even though I complain about them constantly. I wouldn't make them if I didn't like them, and thank you so much for supporting them and supporting me. But that's all the time I have today for this one. I will see you in the next video. Bye, guys!